Hey guys, tonight we begin with something deceptively cozy. Picture this: a warm kitchen, a fire crackling low in the hearth, the clink of ceramic jars, and that unmistakable scent of nutmeg drifting through the air. You know the one? Soft, nutty, gently sweet. Like your grandma's pumpkin pie. If your grandma happened to dabble in 17th century colonialism, espionage, and occasionally sponsoring small-scale naval warfare. Because tonight's story isn't about baking, it's about obsession. A time when spices were more than just flavour. They were fortune, fantasy, and fuel for empire. You're about to enter a world where a pinch of nutmeg could buy you a house, a ship, or a really tense meeting with the Dutch East India Company. You awaken in a bustling European port city. Amsterdam, London, Lisbon, take your pick. Sometime around 1610. The sky is slate grey. The wind off the water bites at your neck. But the harbour is alive. Crates creak as they're unloaded from galleons. Ropes snap against damp wood. And the smell, oh, the smell, hits you like a dream dipped in wine and sweat. Spices, cloves, pepper, cinnamon, and above all, nutmeg. The air hums with it. The streets buzz with it. In taverns, warehouses, and royal courts alike, nutmeg is the name on everyone's cracked lips. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I love knowing who's still awake around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not royalty, not a merchant lord, not a pirate, yet. You're a dockhand, one of the anonymous thousands whose backs bear the weight of Europe's luxury trade. You've never tasted nutmeg. You've maybe smelled it once drifting from the folds of a noblewoman's handkerchief as she passed. But you've seen the madness it causes. You've watched men fight over a single crate. You've seen sailors stabbed for sneaking a handful into their coat linings. You've heard rumours, whispers in the alleys behind the spice houses, that a single sack of nutmeg is worth more than a year's wages. Nutmeg. Just saying the word feels fancy. But what is it really? A seed. An oily, knobby little thing that looks like it belongs in a bowl of trail mix, not on the battlefield. And yet, here it is, shaking the world. To understand the fever, you have to understand the timing. Europe, in the early modern era, smells awful. Not metaphorically, literally. People rarely bathe. Streets double as sewers. Perfume is liquid survival. And nutmeg smells like salvation. It's warm, it's exotic, it's not urine, that's a win, but it's more than just olfactory relief. In the great theory of bodily humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, nutmeg is believed to warm and dry. Perfect for rebalancing your soggy medieval soul. Got a cough? Nutmeg. Indigestion? Nutmeg. Broken heart? Bad dreams? Impending plague? Nutmeg, nutmeg, nutmeg. It's the duct tape of 17th century healthcare. Some people even snort it. Ground fine like snuff, it's taken up the nose to stimulate the brain and ward off illness. Others rub it on their skin or steep it in wine. Apothecaries swear by it. Clergymen endorse it. Chefs treat it like culinary gold. And noblemen collect it, hoard it, wear it in tiny jewelled boxes hung around their necks. It's not just a spice, it's a statement. And here's the twist. For a very long time, nutmeg only grows in one place. One. A smattering of volcanic islands in what is now Indonesia, the Bandas. These are not sprawling land masses with endless forests. They are tiny. You could walk across some of them in under an hour. And yet, for a good stretch of history, the entire global supply of nutmeg comes from these green dots floating in the sea. Naturally, everyone wants in. First, the Portuguese arrive, then the Dutch, then the English. Each builds forts, signs deals, breaks those deals, builds bigger forts, then starts shooting. Because whoever controls Banda controls nutmeg, and whoever controls nutmeg controls, well, a lot. It's spice-fueled imperialism, and it's only just getting started. You hear rumours of these islands in the taverns. Sailors come back from the east with wild stories. Trees heavy with fruit, beaches shimmering with spices, locals trading gold for beads, though they say that with a suspicious glint in their eye. The truth is messier. The Bandanese are experienced traders. They've been dealing with regional powers for centuries. They're not naive, they're just outnumbered. Heavily. Back in Europe, the spice rush reaches fever pitch. Markets explode. Fortunes rise and fall on the smell of a cargo hold. The Dutch East India Company, the VOC, emerges as the biggest player. They are ruthless, efficient, and extremely well funded. Their mission? Control the trade, monopolize supply, and if necessary, eliminate the competition, including eventually the locals. But that's a story for a later section. Right now, you're in Amsterdam, walking past the company's headquarters. It looks like a palace. Marble, oak, gold filigree. Inside, men in stiff collars debate shipping routes and spice quality, while sipping spiced wine that costs more than your annual pay. Outside, you're thinking about your next meal. And still, nutmeg, it's everywhere. In the air, in your dreams, in the dreams of kings and colonizers. It's baked into tiny tarts at Versailles and stirred into meat stews in Edinburgh. It's sent in velvet pouches to Russian courts and gifted in carved boxes to Chinese diplomats. The demand is insatiable. And the supply? Always just a little too tight. Partially because the VOC wants it that way. They deliberately limit exports to drive up prices. They burn surplus stock. They destroy trees in any territory not under their control. Historians still argue whether this was purely strategic or borderline unhinged. Some say it saved their profits, others say it triggered endless conflict, rebellion, and economic collapse. But the Dutch aren't the only ones scheming. The English are lurking just offshore, the French are plotting their own botanical thefts. Everyone wants a slice of this spice pie, and no one's playing nice. You pass a street vendor selling nutmeg for lovers. He claims it sparks desire. He winks. You keep walking. Down the alley you hear an argument brewing. Two merchants, one Dutch, one English. They're shouting about a late shipment, or maybe price fixing, or maybe someone accidentally tried to smuggle mace instead of nutmeg. Hard to tell, tempers flare. A crate is kicked. Someone draws a dagger. A crowd forms, not because they're shocked, but because they've seen this play out before. You edge away, careful not to step in the horse droppings lining the cobblestones. You glance toward the harbour. Another ship is coming in, another load of spices, another round of mayhem. And you wonder, not for the first time, how something that fits in your palm could cause so much chaos. So you head home, past the spice warehouses, past the guards and the gossip, past the windows glowing with candlelight and clove smoke. You settle into your scratchy wool bed, pull a flea-bitten blanket over your knees, and let the scent of nutmeg drift over you like a promise. A promise of power, of empire, of breakfast porridge with just a little more kick, and you drift off, not knowing that tomorrow someone will die for a flavour. And in the Banda Islands, a storm is already forming. You open your eyes, and the air smells expensive. Not just fragrant, expensive. It's warm, wet, heavy with moisture, and layered with the deep, earthy sweetness of nutmeg and mace drying under the tropical sun. You're no longer in Amsterdam or London, or any of those brisk grey cities that hoard nutmeg behind glass jars and price tags. No, you've arrived somewhere completely different. You're in the Banda Islands sometime in the early 1600s, a cluster of volcanic jewels floating in the southern seas, a place so small you could walk across one island before breakfast, and yet so valuable, entire nations would kill for a single grove of its trees. This is where the story truly begins. Because for a long, surreal moment in history, these islands, just 11 in total, held the world's monopoly on nutmeg. Every seed, every precious grain of this golden spice came from here, and not in theory, literally. There were no commercial nutmeg plantations anywhere else, no backup sources, no global supply chains. If you wanted nutmeg, you had to come to Banda. That made the islands unimaginably important, and incredibly vulnerable. At first glance, the place looks like paradise. The trees are tall and graceful, their branches glossy and green. The nutmeg fruits dangle like miniature apricots, each one a treasure chest holding not one but two spices. Crack open the fruit and you'll find a dark brown seed, nutmeg, wrapped in a lace-like fiery red membrane called mace. Two spices from one tree, an economic jackpot. The Bandanese people had known this for centuries. They weren't naive. They had been trading with Indian, Arab and Chinese merchants long before Europeans stumbled onto the scene with their clunky ships and complicated facial hair. Daily life in Banda was deeply tied to the nutmeg harvest. Families gathered fallen fruits, cracked the outer husks, dried the mace in the sun until it turned brittle and crimson, and fermented the seeds over weeks before scraping, smoking and packing them. Trade was communal and seasonal, tied to wind, weather and ritual. Small outrigger boats skimmed across the Banda Sea, linking the islands with neighbouring kingdoms and markets. Nutmeg wasn't just a commodity, it was a rhythm, a lifestyle, a scent that clung to everything. And then, in the early 1500s, the Portuguese arrived. They were the first Europeans to find the Bandas, though find is generous, more like interrupted. They mapped the islands, built a fort or two, and tried to convert the locals to Christianity, while also teaching them the fine European art of being told what to do. But the Bandanese, as it turned out, weren't particularly interested. They allowed the Portuguese to trade, yes, but never fully submitted. For nearly a century, the spice continued flowing. The culture remained independent and the Portuguese influence stayed minimal. Then the Dutch came, and everything changed. It started with the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, founded in 1602. Think of them as a combination of a government, a multinational corporation, and a very stylish cartel. Their goal was simple: dominate the spice trade, permanently. They had shareholders, warships, and contracts so full of fine print that even the fine print had fine print. Their sights locked onto the Banda Islands because they realised what most others hadn't yet. Whoever controls Banda controls nutmeg, and whoever controls nutmeg can basically hold Europe's kitchens, pharmacies and pantries hostage. The VOC sailed in with cannonballs and contracts. At first they tried diplomacy, gifts of cloth and beads, token payments, and treaties written in Dutch that no Bandanese leader could read. In these documents, the Dutch claimed exclusive trading rights. The Bandanese, believing they were simply agreeing to peaceful exchange, signed. When they kept trading with the English and others, the Dutch declared it a betrayal. You walk along a shoreline path, ducking under palm fronds as the sound of drums carries from a village beyond. People are gathering for a harvest ceremony. Children toss nutmeg husks like toys. Mace glistens on bamboo mats, drying in neat red layers like lace cut from flame. The air hums with laughter and smoke and a touch of sea salt. It's beautiful. But it won't last. The Dutch grow increasingly aggressive. They build Fort Nassau in 1609, planting it like a flag on Bandaneira, the largest of the islands. They demand control over all nutmeg trees. They blockade villages that resist. When one Bandanese chief politely reminds them that the islands have always traded freely, the Dutch respond with threats. And then, in 1610, Dutch Admiral Pieter Willems Verhoef is killed in an ambush while negotiating with local leaders. 50 Dutch soldiers die with him. That moment becomes the pivot. Historians still argue whether it was a defensive act or a preemptive strike, whether the Bandanese feared Dutch betrayal or simply refused to be colonised. But what followed was not a debate. It was an escalation. The VOC responds with military force. More forts, more ships, more soldiers. Some Dutch settlers, known as perkeneers, are given plots of land seized from local families. They're expected to oversee production and enforce VOC rules. The Bandanese resist where they can, burning crops, retreating into the forests, hiding boats, but the pressure is relentless. The Dutch, unwilling to share or negotiate, begin turning the screws tighter. You pass through a small mountain grove. The nutmeg trees here are older. Their trunks are gnarled, their leaves thick. This land once belonged to a village elder who was forced to flee after refusing to sign a Dutch loyalty oath. Now it's patrolled by VOC guards, and the fruit is picked by labourers who used to be free farmers. It smells the same. But it isn't the same. The Dutch issue decrees. They punish resistance with public executions. They demand hostages from each village. The islands, once vibrant and self-governed, are becoming militarised. A VOC official writes in his journal that the Bandanese must be brought to obedience or removed. Removed, as in eliminated. Not exactly subtle. And all of this, every contract, every cannon, every ruined village, is about spice. Not silver, not land, not gold, spice. Meanwhile, back in Europe, nutmeg is in fashion like never before. Nobles grind it fresh onto roasted meats. Apothecaries stir it into tonics for fertility, digestion, and melancholy. Some charlatans claim it can cure the plague. Pomanders filled with nutmeg hang from velvet chains to purify the air. A few London doctors even prescribe it for heartbreak. At one point, the price of nutmeg rises so high that it's worth more per gram than gold. Naturally, the only people who never see these profits are the ones who grow it. By the late 1610s, the Dutch are sealing off Banda's coastline. They burn nutmeg groves on neighbouring islands to maintain their monopoly. They attack English spice ships and accuse the Bandanese of treason whenever trade happens without Vort permission. The locals are starving, resisting, fleeing, hiding in the jungle, and across the sea, Vok shareholders toast another quarter of record profits. You sit beneath a tree listening to the wind stir the leaves. Somewhere in the distance, drums beat, low, warning, steady. The scent of nutmeg is everywhere, rich, floral, oddly comforting. But now, it smells a little like grief. The Banda Islands still belong to their people. But for how much longer? And what happens when an empire decides that one spice, one seed, is worth more than the lives of thousands? We'll find out soon, because the VOC isn't done yet, and the next chapter won't smell like paradise. It will smell like gunpowder. You're still in the Banda Islands, but now the air has shifted. The trees still sway gently, the nutmeg still clings sweetly to the breeze, but the stillness isn't peaceful. It's suspicious. The birds seem quieter. The drums you used to hear from village gatherings are silent. What was once a trading paradise is now a landscape of tense stares, whispered meetings, and smoke curling in the distance. The year is 1621, and paradise is about to be extinguished. Let's step back just for a moment. The Dutch East India Company, Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie or VUSA, spent the last 2 decades trying to tighten its grip on the Banda Islands. These tiny volcanic dots in the Indonesian archipelago remain the only place on Earth where nutmeg grows naturally, and the Vok wants every seed under lock and key. Their goal is not just access, but monopoly. Total, uncontested control. And in early modern Europe, monopoly isn't just a business strategy, it's an excuse for war. Despite Dutch forts, guns, and increasingly rigid policies, the Bandanese people have resisted. And not with armies, just stubbornness, quiet refusal. They continue trading with English merchants. They hide their harvests, they delay, they stall, they disappear into the forest when soldiers come calling. To the Dutch, this is mutiny. To the Bandanese, it's survival. Enter Jan-Pieter Zoon Cohen. Cohen is the Governor-General of the Dutch East Indies. He's not a subtle man. He believes deeply in 2 things, the glory of the Vok and his own absolute authority. He writes in his journals about order and discipline and the necessity of force. He sees the Bandanese not as a proud, independent people, with a long tradition of trade and self-governance, but as a problem to be solved. And in 1621, he sails into Banda with his solution. He arrives with a fleet of ships. Soldiers in red and grey coats disembark, muskets polished, swords sharpened. They've brought translators, scribes, priests, and cannons. This isn't a trading mission, it's a statement, and that statement is submit or vanish. You wake to find the harbour full of masts. The Vok flag flaps against the humid wind. Smoke curls up from the new Dutch encampment near Fort Nassau. The village elder walks the shoreline silently. He knows what's coming. You do too. The Bandanese attempt one last round of negotiations. They offer tribute, gestures of peace. But Cohen is no longer interested in treaties. He claims the Bandanese have broken faith too many times, that their continued resistance to Dutch monopoly justifies correction. These aren't vague threats. They're precursors to what would become one of the most brutal acts of colonial violence in the region's history. In April 1621, Cohen gives the order. The massacre begins. It's not a single battle, not a dramatic moment you can freeze in a painting. It's a methodical, calculated purge. The Dutch army moves through the islands, burning homes, torching nutmeg groves, executing those who resist, enslaving those who don't. Entire villages are wiped out in hours. Men are tied together and thrown from cliffs. Women and children are forced to watch. Chiefs are dragged into public squares and hanged as warnings. No quarter is given. No distinction is made between warrior and farmer, leader and child. The air, once rich with mace drying in the sun, now reeks of blood and fire. Historians still debate the exact death toll, but before 1621, Banda's population is estimated between 13,000 and 15,000 people. After the Dutch finish their campaign, fewer than 1,000 Bandanese remain. Some are killed, others starve, many are sold into slavery or deported to distant islands under VOC control. A culture, a language, a way of life that had thrived for centuries is shattered in a matter of weeks. You walk through what's left of a village. The ground is scorched. Charcoal crunches beneath your feet. Nutmeg trees stand like skeletons, stripped and blackened. A single stone well sits undisturbed. The bucket hangs by a thread, swinging gently. No voices call, no children run past, just the low hum of flies and the crackle of dying embers. Cohen declares victory. He sends letters to VOC headquarters in Batavia and Amsterdam, praising the campaign's success. He frames the massacre as a necessary step in establishing spice monopoly and ensuring company loyalty. He talks of discipline and future prosperity. The board of directors is pleased. To secure their grip on Banda, the Dutch repopulate the islands with forced labourers. These include enslaved people from other parts of Indonesia, Timor, Sulawesi, Java, brought into work under the supervision of Dutch perkeneers or plantation landlords. These perkeneers are given land grants, VOC contracts, and local authority. They are expected to manage nutmeg production efficiently. Their plantations are carved out of seized Bandanese farmland. Each perkeneer is given 25 slaves, and each enslaved worker is expected to harvest, process and package nutmeg for export to Europe. The Bandanese, whose ancestors had once traded freely across the seas, are now either dead, disappeared, or serving as forced labourers on what used to be their own soil. It's a dark system, profitable, efficient, and very quiet. Back in Amsterdam, the VOC celebrates a record year. Nutmeg prices rise. Investors clap politely during board meetings. Elegant jars of mace are wrapped in silk and gifted to European royalty. No one asks where the trees grow now. No one asks whose blood watered the roots. The Dutch monopoly holds. Smuggling nutmeg becomes a death sentence. Even carrying nutmeg seeds off the island is forbidden. Trees outside Dutch control are cut down and burned. The VOC will do anything to ensure that Banda remains the world's only source. They control the harvest, the shipping, the markets, the myths. But even monopolies have cracks. Some of the surviving Bandanese escape. They flee to neighbouring islands. Some settle in English-held territories. Their descendants will carry fragments of the old stories, the old songs, the old scents, whispered memories of fruit split open like golden bells, of mornings in the spice groves, of families gathered beneath the trees. You sit under one such tree now. A nutmeg fruit has just fallen beside you. It splits open silently, revealing its perfect seed. Mace fans out like a red lace glove. The scent is rich, warm, a little sweet. But it also smells like ash now, like something lost. And Cohen, he dies a few years later, young, celebrated. His name is etched into Dutch colonial records as a founder, a visionary, a man of discipline. Monuments will be built, streets named after him. But his legacy, for those who remember, will always carry the bitter trace of nutmeg and blood. History rarely tastes sweet without cost, and we still have far to go. The smoke from the Banda massacre may have drifted out to sea, but the scent of nutmeg never left. Back in Europe, the fires are invisible. The violence is footnoted, if it's mentioned at all. To the VOC's investors, 1621 is a triumphant year. Order has been restored. The market is steady. Nutmeg shipments have resumed. Everyone gets paid, and no one asks too many questions. But in the Banda Islands, beneath the rebuilt Dutch forts and behind the hedgerows of nutmeg trees, the silence is overwhelming. Entire villages are gone. The Bandanese themselves, what few remain, are enslaved or exiled. The trees still grow, but the people who once danced around them, sang to them, told stories about their fruit. They're no longer there to speak, and yet the world keeps turning. The Dutch, now firmly in control, have done what no one thought possible. They've created a true spice monopoly. From Banda, they export nutmeg by the ton, controlling not just supply but price, quality and shipping routes. In an age before modern logistics, they've built an empire on something that fits in the palm of your hand, and they intend to keep it that way. But history never follows a straight line, and empires, no matter how carefully managed, always have competition. Across the sea, the English East India Company is watching. They're annoyed. The English had been trying to carve out their own space in the spice trade for decades. They'd flirted with alliances in the region. They'd negotiated with Bandanese chiefs before the Dutch slaughtered them, and they'd even managed to hold on to one stubborn little island, Pulau Run. You probably haven't heard of Pulau Run. It's not famous. It doesn't appear in many history books. It's smaller than Central Park and so remote that even most VOC cartographers didn't bother to draw it accurately, but in the early 1600s Pulau Run was a prize, because it had nutmeg, and it hadn't been conquered yet. In 1616 the English managed to plant their flag there. It was mostly symbolic. A single garrison, a few outposts, and a shaky agreement with the locals. But it was enough. The Dutch hated it. The English loved it. And the Bandanese, well, they just wanted to survive. Pulau Run quickly became a diplomatic splinter. The Dutch launched raids, trying to dislodge the English. The English countered by harassing Dutch spice ships. The whole conflict simmered just below open war. It was the kind of colonial quarrel that played out halfway across the world, but echoed loudly in European courtrooms and boardrooms. One island, one spice, two empires. Then something unexpected happened. Thousands of miles away, across an entirely different ocean, another tiny island was causing trouble. This one was called Manhattan. Yes, that Manhattan. In the mid-1600s, the Dutch had claimed it as New Amsterdam. It was swampy, lightly populated, and full of promise. The English, not particularly fond of Dutch settlements so close to their North American colonies, decided to take it. And they did. In 1664, they sailed into the harbour and politely, or not so politely, kicked the Dutch out. The Dutch naturally were furious, but they also had bigger problems. Wars in Europe, economic uncertainty, and the ever-present need to protect their spice monopoly. Which brings us to one of the strangest trades in history. In 1667, the Treaty of Breda was signed to end the Second Anglo-Dutch War. Among its many clauses was this little gem. England would keep Manhattan. In exchange, the Dutch would keep Pulau Run. You heard that right. Manhattan, home to more than 8 million people today, centre of global finance, birthplace of Broadway, was once traded for a nutmeg island. At the time, it made perfect sense. Pulau Run had nutmeg trees. Manhattan had beavers. One spice was still worth more than gold. The other? Just a fur trade outpost. The Dutch believed they'd gotten the better deal. They secured full control over Banda. The monopoly was complete. The English, meanwhile, had no idea what Manhattan would become. You stand now on the rocky shores of Pulau Run. The ocean sparkles, the trees whisper. There are no forts here anymore, no soldiers, no traders in powdered wigs. Just the breeze and the knowledge that this little island once changed the shape of global trade. Meanwhile, back in Banda, the Dutch are busy institutionalizing their new system. The spice trade isn't just a business, it's a bureaucracy. Nutmeg production is tightly regulated. Each tree is tagged. Each harvest is recorded. The VOC sets quotas, prices and shipping schedules. Perkeneers, Dutch landholders granted rights over local plantations, oversee enslaved labourers imported from Java, Bali and beyond. These aren't free workers, they are property. Life on a VOC plantation is brutal. Labourers work long days harvesting nutmeg and drying mace under the tropical sun. Punishments are harsh. Escape is nearly impossible. The air smells of spices, but also sweat and fear and the slow erosion of human dignity. And still, the spice flows. Europe can't get enough. Nutmeg is used in baking, in meat preservation, in perfumed oils and medicinal tonics. Apothecaries sell it as a cure-all. It appears in the kitchens of kings and the cupboards of middle-class merchants. It is ground into sauces, stirred into stews and sprinkled across sweetmeats at the finest balls in Paris and Vienna. It is everywhere. No one, of course, mentions the massacre, or the trade for Manhattan, or the plantations run by whip and chain. In the ledgers, nutmeg is simply a number. You walk now through a plantation path. Tall nutmeg trees form a shaded corridor. Their fruits dangle above, golden and ripe. A worker walks past you, barefoot, thin, silent. He carries a woven basket and a long stick for knocking down the fruit. He doesn't speak, he doesn't look up, he just walks. And beneath your feet, the soil is dark and rich, fertile with spice and history and things no one wrote down. This is what empire tastes like. Sweet, bitter, warm and expensive, and we're just getting started. you're still walking that narrow path through the banda groves, where the breeze carries the warm, sweet scent of nutmeg, rich, velvety, almost hypnotic. The trees tower above you in neat rows now, perfectly spaced, their fruit dangling like miniature lanterns. The chaotic beauty of the old Bandanese groves is gone. In its place, order, structure, profit. Each branch, each seed, each harvest now follows a schedule dictated not by the earth, but by the Dutch East India Company. This is no longer a place of community, it's a machine. And yet even here something is beginning to fray. It's the late 1600s, and the Dutch are still king. Their monopoly over nutmeg has lasted longer than anyone thought possible. After the Banda massacre, they tightened their grip, ensuring that not a single seed could leave the islands intact. Every nutmeg tree outside Dutch control was destroyed. Every shipment out of Banda was inspected, catalogued, sealed. Even the mace, the delicate red lace that wraps each nutmeg seed, was tracked like a state secret. The VOC wanted to own not just the spice, but the very idea of nutmeg. But monopolies, like all things in empire, are fragile, especially when they're built on violence, secrecy and fear. Let's take a closer look at how the VOC maintained this illusion of absolute control. Every nutmeg plantation, or perk, was managed by a Dutch settler known as a perkeneer. These men were granted parcels of land by the company and tasked with overseeing the harvest. They didn't work the fields themselves, of course. That was done by slaves, many of them brought in from Java, Bali or Sulawesi. In some cases, they were prisoners of war. In others, they were simply purchased. These workers were expected to maintain the groves, collect fruit, dry mace, and pack nutmeg seeds for export. They laboured in brutal heat, under watchful eyes, with little rest and even less hope. Conditions were harsh. Punishments were cruel. Disease was common. Some perkeneers were sadistic, others were simply indifferent. Either way, the VOC turned a blind eye, as long as the shipments made it to Batavia and then onto Europe. In the ledgers, people became units of production, and if one died, another could be bought. Still, the spice flowed, and Europe couldn't get enough. Nutmeg graced the tables of royalty, flavoured puddings in Paris, cured meat in Vienna. Apothecaries praised its power to aid digestion, soothe nerves, and even cure the common cold. Some physicians claimed it could relieve gout, others suggested it improved memory. A few whispered that it had aphrodisiac effects, especially in men of a certain age. It was ground into perfumes, used in tooth powders, stirred into wine. It wasn't just a luxury, it was a lifestyle. But as demand grew, the VOC faced a problem of its own making. They had succeeded too well. Nutmeg, once rare and fiercely coveted, was now everywhere. Prices began to dip. Not drastically, but enough to rattle shareholders. The VOC couldn't let the market flood. That would collapse the illusion of scarcity. So they made a choice. They burned it. Barrels of nutmeg, perfectly good and ready for export, were set alight or dumped into the sea. Not because they were spoiled, but because there was too much. This practice, known as destruction for control, became routine. It wasn't seen as wasteful. It was strategic. Better to destroy surplus than let prices fall. Better to feed the illusion of exclusivity than admit the world might have enough. You find yourself standing near one of these bonfires. It's late evening. The sun has dipped behind the hills. Workers toss sacks of nutmeg into the flames. The seeds crack as they burn, releasing a scent both intoxicating and terrible. The perkeneer watches, arms crossed, silent. You expect anger or frustration. But all you see is calculation. He's doing math, not mourning. And then, word arrives, a rumour at first, then whispers, then proof. Nutmeg trees have been found. Elsewhere. The French have done it. Somehow, some way, they've gotten hold of viable seedlings. No one is quite sure how. Maybe a spy bribed a Dutch guard. Maybe a rogue sailor smuggled them out in a barrel of flour. One story says a French botanist disguised himself as a merchant and escaped Banda with cuttings hidden in hollowed-out books. Another claims he strapped the seedlings to his chest beneath his cloak and pretended to be hunchbacked. However it happened. Nutmeg has taken root in Réunion, then Mauritius, then the Caribbean. At first, the Dutch scoff. Surely these transplants will fail. Banda's volcanic soil, they claim, is the only place nutmeg can truly thrive. The climate, the rainfall, the spirit of the land, unique. But then reports begin to trickle in. The trees are growing, they're bearing fruit. French colonial governors are already planning plantations. Panic sets in. The VOC doubles down, they increase inspections, they sentence smugglers to death. They spread disinformation, claiming that nutmeg grown outside Banda is poisonous, weak, or fake. They even deploy agents to sabotage foreign groves. But it's too late. The monopoly is cracking. You're on a Dutch ship now, docked in Batavia. Officers are arguing below deck. One of them slams a crate. "Réunion?" he growls. "They'll flood the market." Another mutters about spies. A third, older, just sighs. "It was always going to happen," he says quietly. "You can't keep the whole world out forever." He's right. Monopolies don't last, especially not ones built on secrets. Back in Europe, merchants begin noticing something odd. Nutmeg prices fluctuate. New vendors appear. Some spices arrive without VOC stamps. The taste? Nearly identical. Some buyers don't care where it came from. Others are thrilled to get nutmeg at half the price. And so it spreads. The VOC still controls Banda, still owns the groves, still ships thousands of pounds of nutmeg every year, but they no longer control all of it. Their absolute power has slipped, and with that, their profit margins. The company starts to wobble. In a few decades, it will collapse, but for now, it holds on, grimly, desperately. And Banda? Still beautiful, still fragrant, but no longer alone. You walk the groves one last time. A nutmeg fruit splits open above you. The red of the mace glows in the twilight. For a moment, the air is silent. Then you hear it. Laughter. Children playing in a new grove. Far from Banda, far from chains, and the world breathes in the spice again. Not as a monopoly, but as something finally, quietly, free. You wake now to a familiar warmth. Sunlight filtering through trees, insects humming lazily in the undergrowth, and always the rich, comforting scent of nutmeg in the air. But today, that smell feels different. Not rare, not sacred, just present. As if the world has finally stopped chasing it, and the spice has settled into being what it was always meant to be. A flavour, not a force. It's the early 1700s, and the age of nutmeg empires is quietly unravelling. The Banda Islands are still beautiful. The trees still rise in orderly rows across the hillsides, their fruits ripening gently in the tropical sun. Dutch percaneers still oversee the groves, and ships still dock in Banda Neira to collect barrels of dried nutmeg and crimson mace. On the surface, it looks like nothing has changed, but the quiet is deceptive. Beneath it, something is shifting. For nearly a century, the Dutch East India Company, or VOC, maintained one of the most ruthless monopolies in human history. Banda's nutmeg was the crown jewel of its empire, guarded by treaties, warships, forced labour and fear. No seed left the island without being scalded or coated in lime to kill it. No rival trade route went unchallenged. No smuggler escaped justice, at least not often. Banda was the beating heart of the spice trade, and the VOC was its iron hand. But now, the heart is still beating, just a little slower, a little quieter, a little tired. By the 1720s, the cracks in the monopoly are growing wider. Smuggled trees have taken root in Mauritius, Réunion and the Caribbean. Nutmeg, once confined to 11 tiny islands, is now blooming across multiple continents, and the Dutch can't stop it. Not anymore. You stroll through a grove that's been worked for generations. The trees are older now. Their bark bears the marks of time. The workers harvesting fruit aren't enslaved anymore, but most are still poor, still watched, still locked into a system designed decades ago by men who believed spice was worth more than lives. The percaneers, once the proud overlords of this industry, are aging too. Some still cling to their ledgers and routines. Others quietly abandon their plots, moving inland or back to Batavia, where other trades, coffee, tea, sugar, are proving more profitable. You overhear a conversation between two Dutch officials on a veranda. One complains that the price of nutmeg has fallen, the other shrugs. "People want chocolate now," he says with a tired smile, "and porcelain. No one wants a war over soup seasoning. That's the crux of it. The taste of Europe is changing, and so is its economy." Back in the 1600s, nutmeg was worshipped. It was believed to cure illness, prevent plague, enhance love, improve digestion, and mask the many smells of a largely unwashed continent. It was not just a flavour, it was a miracle. But miracles fade with overuse. In the 18th century, European medicine begins modernising. The theory of humours, once the foundation of spice-based healing, loses ground to more empirical methods. Germ theory hasn't arrived yet, but people are no longer prescribing nutmeg to ward off bad air. Its mystical properties start sounding like superstition. Doctors still include it in remedies, but now it's just one ingredient among many, no longer the star. At the same time, the culinary world is expanding. Sugar, cheap and increasingly available from slave-run plantations in the Caribbean, is transforming European tastes. Chocolate, vanilla, and even tobacco begin crowding out traditional spices. Nutmeg is still loved, yes, but it's no longer sacred. It goes from the centre of the royal feast to a background note in the pudding. You find yourself in a bakery in Amsterdam. It's 1735. A young woman is grating nutmeg into a bowl of dough. Her movements are quick, casual. She doesn't even look at the spice. There's no reverence in her hands, just habit. A pinch here, a sprinkle there. Outside, a man sells oranges. A child eats a sugar biscuit. No one mentions Banda. No one knows that 2 generations ago people were murdered for this smell. The VOC notices. Their profits from nutmeg begin to slip. And unlike other commodities, the nutmeg monopoly doesn't scale well. You can't grow more without undermining scarcity. And now that other countries are growing it, scarcity is gone. Worse still, the company itself is bloated. Decades of corruption, mismanagement, and imperial overreach have weakened its foundations. Governors write back to Amsterdam begging for more ships, more soldiers, more silver, but fewer and fewer investors are interested in spices. The glory days are behind them. Still, the Dutch try to keep up appearances. They increase taxes, they tighten regulations, they punish smuggling with new severity. But it's like patching a ship already taking on water. Nutmeg can't carry the weight of an empire anymore. Not with coffee pouring out of Java, or tea arriving from China, or sugar turning every cup of breakfast porridge into something people actually enjoy. The VOC doubles down on secrecy. They deny the success of foreign plantations. They spread rumours that non-Banda nutmeg is bitter or inferior, but merchants know better. French nutmeg looks the same, tastes the same, costs less. The Dutch even attempt sabotage. Some reports suggest they sent agents to poison foreign groves, to burn seedlings, to disrupt trade in the Caribbean. But by now, it's too late. The seed has quite literally escaped. You return to Banda for a moment. It's quieter than it was. The forts are still standing, but the soldiers look bored. The docks are busy, but the urgency is gone. The town no longer feels like the centre of the universe. Because it isn't. And the nutmeg? Still here, still fragrant. Still harvested every season. But no longer holy. You kneel beneath a tree. A fruit has just fallen, splitting open in the sunlight. The seed glows a little in the dust. You pick it up, hold it in your palm, feel its lightness, its smoothness, its absurd, quiet power. This is what empires were built on, what people died for, what trees were guarded like treasure chests. Now, it's just a spice. Delicious, yes, but no longer deadly. You wake to the sound of rain. Not a heavy storm, just a quiet, persistent drizzle falling through the canopy of nutmeg trees. It beads on the waxy leaves, slides down twisted branches, and collects in little puddles along the dirt paths winding through the groves. The scent in the air is thick and familiar. Wet earth, fermenting husks, smoke from a distant hearth, and nutmeg. Always nutmeg. But here in the year 1750, the smell no longer carries the same weight it once did. It isn't the perfume of power anymore. It's the scent of something fading, something that once ruled the world and is now becoming background noise. The Banda Islands are still here. The trees are still standing. But the age of nutmeg empires is dying, softly, slowly, like a candle burning low on its wick. The VOC still operates the groves, still oversees the shipments, still stamps its insignia on crates bound for Europe. But no one is fooled anymore. The monopoly is cracked. The mystique is gone. And what remains is a system running on inertia and memory. Walk with me. You make your way down a muddy path between rows of trees. The rain has washed the air clean. Mace glistens on drying racks under covered shelters, its lacy strands glowing red against the grey sky. A few workers move quietly among the trees, barefoot, soaked to the knees, gathering fallen fruit. These aren't slaves, at least not by name. They're indentured labourers, debt-bound workers, or children of displaced families who have lived in Banda for generations. They speak a mix of Malay and Dutch, and they know the rhythm of this harvest better than anyone else. The Percaneer, the plantation landlord, stands on a veranda overlooking the groves. His uniform is wrinkled, his boots muddy. He lights a clay pipe with a shaking hand and peers out into the mist. He's in his 50s, born on the island, never seen Amsterdam. His father was a company man. His son won't be. He knows this. Everyone knows this. Because no one really believes in the company anymore. Inside his study, the ledgers lie open. The numbers are there, but they don't add up the way they used to. Nutmeg prices have dropped. Harvests are harder to move. European buyers complain about the quality. The French batch is cheaper, they say, or worse. We've started growing it ourselves. Because by now, nutmeg trees have taken root far from Banda. In Réunion, in Mauritius, in Grenada, in the Caribbean, local farmers are experimenting with nutmeg cultivation under British and French flags. The seeds once guarded so viciously by the Vioque have escaped, grown, and thrived in foreign soil. The spice is no longer a secret. It's a crop. You board a Dutch merchant ship anchored off Banda's coast. The sailors are restless. They grumble about the long journey, the poor wages, the boring cargo. There was a time when nutmeg was treated like treasure. Now it's stacked in barrels beside sacks of rice and dried fish. No guards. No special markings. Just one more item in the hold. Back in Amsterdam, in VOC headquarters, the directors are holding emergency meetings. They know the monopoly is dying, but they don't know how to stop it. The company is bloated with bureaucracy, crippled by corruption. Forts in distant outposts crumble while company officers write flowery reports that say everything is fine. Ships go missing, profits shrink, debts rise. Still, the world keeps spinning. You arrive in a spice market in London, 1755. The stalls are piled high with goods from across the empire: pepper, cloves, cinnamon, coffee, tobacco, and yes, nutmeg. A woman in a blue shawl purchases a small jar. "For the holiday pudding," she says cheerfully. She doesn't ask where it came from. She doesn't care. To her, nutmeg is no longer a luxury. It's tradition. Nearby, a newspaper vendor sells pamphlets describing new plantations in Jamaica and Grenada. There are rumours that British officials plan to flood the market with West Indian nutmeg. If they succeed, the VOC's control will shatter completely. You walk through the streets of Batavia. The Dutch colonial capital is hot, crowded, and visibly tired. Buildings that once gleamed with fresh paint now peel under tropical rains. Bureaucrats sip tepid coffee, complaining about those damned spice quotas. The nutmeg warehouses still stand, but half of them are empty. The spice still smells the same, but no one seems to notice anymore. In one warehouse, you find an old wooden crate marked with the VOC seal. Inside, dried nutmeg seeds packed in straw. A few have cracked, one has sprouted. A tiny green shoot curls up from the husk, seeking light. You pick it up. It feels light in your palm, smooth and warm from the air. The seed that once built empires, started wars, traded hands for cities, now just waits to be planted. But there is still one place where nutmeg holds power, though not the kind measured in coins or colonies: imagination. Back in Europe, the age of romanticism is stirring. Writers and artists begin to paint the East Indies not as brutal systems of exploitation, but as distant lands of wonder and perfume. The Spice Islands become shorthand for paradise. Colonial violence is edited out. In its place, paintings of gentle groves, smiling workers, and golden sunsets. Nutmeg, once stained with blood, is rebranded as adventure. You attend a salon in Paris in 1760. A poet recites lines about the warm kiss of nutmeg winds. A painter unveils a landscape of palm trees and dancing islanders. No one mentions the VOC. No one speaks of Banda. It's all myth now, decorative, fragrant, safe. You step outside into the cold night. The street smells of horse manure and firewood. A bakery on the corner is serving sweet rolls dusted with cinnamon and nutmeg. A child bites into one and smiles, and you wonder, how many people today know that a single spoonful of that spice once cost lives, that it once bought cities, that it once built and broke entire empires? In Banda, it's morning again. The rain has stopped. The trees shimmer with dew. A fruit falls, splits open, and reveals the familiar seed inside. Nothing has changed, everything has changed, and still the nutmeg grows. You open your eyes to the sound of roosters crowing somewhere beyond the trees, mingled with the rustle of palm fronds in the morning breeze. The sky over Banda is streaked with gold, and the air is as warm as always, thick with dew, the scent of distant smoke and something earthy, sweet and impossibly familiar. Nutmeg. That old fragrance again. But there's something different about it now. It no longer carries the weight of monopoly. It doesn't whisper of warships or silence chiefs. This morning it simply smells like what it is, a spice. It's the year 1799, and the Dutch East India Company, the great VOC, is dead. Not metaphorically, not figuratively, legally, officially, terminally. For nearly 2 centuries it reigned as the most powerful trading entity the world had ever seen. It built forts, commanded navies, held courts, minted coins, and enslaved thousands, all in pursuit of cloves, pepper, and above all, nutmeg. But by the end of the 18th century, the VOC is bankrupt in every way, financially, morally, and functionally. Corruption had spread through its ranks like dry rot through a wooden ship. Entire shipments disappeared. Governors grew rich while the treasury ran dry. Political infighting back in the Netherlands turned budgets into bargaining chips. And while the company tried desperately to hold on to its spice monopoly, the world had already outgrown it. Let's walk through Banda one more time. The island hasn't changed much, geographically speaking. The sea still crashes against volcanic rock. The groves are still green and dense, but the tempo is different now. The buildings the company left behind are still here, but most are crumbling. The great stone warehouses that once overflowed with barrels of mason nutmeg are now half empty. The VOC insignia, once proudly etched into iron gates and wooden beams, fades in the tropical sun. A Dutch administrator remains, scribbling reports in a mildew-stained office. But he no longer works for a company. He works for a nation now. When the VOC collapsed, the Dutch state stepped in to absorb its territories and debts. Banda became part of the Dutch East Indies, a colony, no longer a corporation. But for the islanders, it's a change in name, not in nature. Some of the local people still remember the old times, not fondly. The stories are passed down in quiet voices, of chiefs hanged in village squares, of nutmeg groves seized overnight, of people taken from their homes and sent across the sea. Those memories linger, even if no one writes them down. But time softens even the sharpest wounds. The nutmeg trees keep growing. It's harvest season again. You walk through the groves at dawn. Workers, some descendants of slaves, others of settlers, and many of mixed heritage, move quietly between the trees collecting fallen fruit. The rhythm hasn't changed much over the years. Crack the yellow pod, pull back the red lace of mace, and free the smooth brown seed. Dry it, sort it, pack it, ship it. But the world receiving those shipments is no longer obsessed. Nutmeg has become common. No longer sold at the price of gold, it is now tucked into spice cabinets beside cinnamon, allspice and ginger. It flavours desserts, preserves meats, seasons drinks. Still loved, yes. Still valued, but not worshipped. In Paris, bakers grate nutmeg into creamy custards. In Vienna, it's dusted over hot punch. In London, housewives buy it in tins, not treasure chests. Apothecaries still claim it can aid digestion or soothe the nerves, but few believe it can ward off the plague anymore. Science is replacing superstition. Taste is replacing trade. But Banda's story isn't quite finished. While the company's monopoly has collapsed, its legacy lingers in the roots of every tree. The nutmeg plantations remain. The land still belongs, legally, to Dutch landlords, though many have left or sold their rights. The groves are now worked by locals and migrants from other islands. Some are free farmers, others are tied to land by debt or contract. And far away, in the Caribbean, nutmeg is thriving. The French succeeded in transplanting Banda's treasure. So did the British. Grenada, in particular, becomes a rising star in the spice world. By the early 1800s, the Caribbean's nutmeg plantations are growing steadily, and soon they will overtake the Dutch East Indies in global exports. A seed smuggled out in secret is now growing freely, abundantly, in new soil. This, in the end, is what breaks the last illusion, that any one nation or company could hold the world's appetite in its hands forever. You visit a French plantation in Réunion. The land is hilly, rich, alive with birdsong. A farmer cracks a nutmeg pod open and tells you with a smile the Dutch thought it would never grow here. But it did. It grows where people care for it. And then he adds, besides, the tree doesn't know about monopolies. The irony isn't lost on you. The tree that built empires is indifferent to empires. It just wants sunlight, soil and time. And what of Manhattan? Traded away by the English for the Wolsey's claim to Pulau Run. In the 1790s, it's bustling, growing, nothing like the sleepy outpost it once was. Soon, it will become a centre of commerce unlike anything the 17th century traders could have imagined. Pulau Run, meanwhile, is still quiet, still growing nutmeg, still dreaming in green. So, was it a fair trade? Historians still argue, they always will. But perhaps that's the wrong question, because history isn't a balance sheet, it's a story. And the story of nutmeg is one of obsession, violence, beauty, control, and eventually, release. You return to Banda once more. The sun is setting now, the air is still and golden. In a quiet grove, a child reaches up to pluck a ripe nutmeg fruit. She splits it open with practiced hands. The seed falls into her palm. She holds it up to the light. There's no crown, no emblem, no company mark. Just a seed, and all the history it carries inside. She tucks it into a basket, then she runs home. Dinner's almost ready, and someone is waiting to season the pot. The tree keeps growing, and the world, at last, has let go. You awaken now to a day heavy with the scent of salt and spice. A slow Caribbean breeze moves through the palms, and the trees overhead rustle softly. You're not in Banda anymore. You're thousands of miles away, on the lush green island of Grenada. It's the early 1800s, and the Banda Islands, once the only place on Earth that could grow nutmeg, are no longer the centre of this story. Because now, that story has taken root in new soil. Here in the West Indies, a transformation is underway. The Dutch East India Company is no more. Its monopoly has collapsed, its flags lowered, its fortresses now crumbling relics of ambition. Nutmeg, once protected by musket, guarded by treaties, and soaked in blood, is now growing in the rich volcanic hills of Grenada. And unlike Banda, it's not a miracle, it's a crop, a successful one. Walk with me up the slopes of St Andrew Parish, where the first trees brought by the British from Southeast Asia have not only survived but flourished. The soil is dark and loamy. The air is thick with the sweet perfume of mace and fermenting fruit. A woman in a cotton head wrap carries a basket of fallen pods, their yellow skins splitting open to reveal the shining brown seeds inside. She doesn't speak, but you can see in her rhythm that she's done this many times before. Harvesting nutmeg here is routine, seasonal, expected. But beneath this peaceful surface lies another truth. Most of the people working these groves are not free. Slavery is still very real in the British Caribbean. The workers tending Grenada's nutmeg plantations are largely African-born or descended from enslaved populations brought across the Atlantic. They labour from sunrise to sundown in the sticky heat. Many were born here, but none came by choice. Their lives are regulated by overseers, their labour recorded in ledgers, their bodies treated as property. So no, this isn't Banda. But the cruelty of empire has followed the seed. Still, in London drawing rooms and Edinburgh tea parlours, few people think about that. They think about flavour. They think about nutmeg biscuits and mulled wine and holiday puddings with that exotic warmth that's become so fashionable. When asked where the spice comes from now, the answer is rarely Banda. It's Grenada, or the Spice Isle, as the travel brochures will one day call it. And what of Banda? Well, Banda is quiet. The groves still stand. Some still produce. But the frenzy is gone. The Dutch have turned their attention to other ventures. Coffee, tea, sugar. Nutmeg is no longer the jewel of their empire. It's just one trade among many. And the Banda people, what remains of them, live in the long shadow of a history that was once too loud to ignore. You walk through Grenada's main port in St George's. British ships dock regularly now, loading crates of nutmeg and sacks of dried mace, bound for Liverpool, Bristol and Boston. The process is smooth, industrialised. There's no urgency, no paranoia about smuggling or rival empires stealing the crop. The spice trade, once a game of violence and sabotage, is now a business, a brutal one, still built on backs and chains, but less theatrical, more methodical. A British merchant boasts to you that Grenada's nutmeg is cleaner, more fragrant and more reliable than any that came from the East Indies. He talks about yields and shipping times and global demand. He doesn't mention the enslaved workers. He doesn't mention Banda. But you remember the trees of Banda, where the fruit fell like rain after a storm, where chiefs once danced in sacred groves before the VOC came. You remember the massacre, the monopoly, the myth. And now you see how that story is being rewritten, not erased, but edited, softened. Because Grenada's nutmeg is succeeding, and with it, the need to remember where the story began fades. By 1830, Grenada will be one of the world's top nutmeg producers. A few decades after that, it will dominate the market almost entirely. When people think of nutmeg in the 19th century, they think of this island, of West Indian plantations, of British labels on tins. Few will know that the trees came from a cluster of volcanic islands near Indonesia, smuggled out by spies, pirates and smugglers. You visit a spice warehouse on the southern coast. The air is thick with dust and fragrance. Sacks of mace line the walls. Crates marked Grenada Nutmeg, product of the British West Indies, are stacked 10 high. Workers file in and out, wiping sweat from their faces, moving with practiced speed. There's no ceremony here, only the repetition of commerce, and that's what nutmeg has become now. Routine, but not without beauty. Because despite everything, despite empire and exploitation and economic shift, the nutmeg itself hasn't changed. The tree still opens its fruit with the same gentle split. The mace still glows with that impossible red. The seed still rolls quietly into the hand like a stone of warmth and wonder. And sometimes, late at night, you wonder if the tree remembers. Does it remember the mountain soil of Banda? Does it remember the first groves planted by people who sang to the trees instead of selling them? Historians still argue about who first brought nutmeg to the Caribbean. Some credit a French horticulturist. Others claim a rogue British captain with a keen eye and sticky fingers. A few stories suggest it was a native crew member, slipping a pod into his pocket before the ship left the East Indies. The truth, like most history, is probably a tangle of all three. But what matters is this: the seed survived. It left the monopoly, it found new ground, and it grew. Now, nutmeg travels the world without gunships. It arrives in quiet kitchens and school cafeterias, in pies and perfumes, in baby food and bar cocktails. It has become one of the many small comforts that no longer belongs to empire, but to everyone. You sit beneath a nutmeg tree in Grenada. Its branches sway gently in the breeze. A fruit falls, bursts open. You pick up the seed. It's warm from the sun, wrapped in red lace. It feels light, ordinary, but you know better. This seed has sailed oceans, sparked wars, built cities, toppled companies, and now it rests here, quiet, unguarded, alive. The empire is gone, the company is gone, even the memory is fading, but the tree remains. You're still beneath that nutmeg tree in Grenada when the wind changes. It rustles the broad leaves above you, sending a few pods tumbling to the earth with soft rhythmic thuds. The scent in the air is deep, an earthy sweetness wrapped in humidity, mingled with distant wood smoke and the call of birds. The year is now 1840, and the story of nutmeg has taken another quiet turn. There are no more battles for control, no VOC officers lurking in forts, no secret raids to steal seeds under the cover of darkness. The world, it seems, has finally stopped chasing the spice. But even in this calm, the legacy of nutmeg is still unfolding, less dramatic now, but no less telling. What once fueled wars and monopolies is now being carefully folded into pies, stirred into puddings, and sprinkled into hot drinks across the globe. Let's start in London. The city is booming. Steam trains whistle through crowded streets. Chimneys spew grey clouds into already grey skies. Markets are full of clamour and colour. In a grocery stall near Covent Garden, a merchant sells West Indian nutmeg in tins, each one decorated with tiny palm trees and colonial fonts. A young woman buys one, not for medicinal use, not for a royal feast, but for her apple tart. She doesn't pause to ask where it came from. She doesn't have to. To her, it's as common as sugar. That's the new magic of nutmeg. It has gone from sacred to standard. It's in your home, your bakery, your breakfast, not in vaults, not in fortresses, in measuring spoons, but to understand how this happened, we must return, just briefly, to the plantations. Grenada, now nicknamed the Spice Isle, has grown into the world's primary source of nutmeg. British officials boast about its output in colonial reports. Botanists conduct soil studies. Traders open new routes to North America, and the island's economy shifts more and more toward one purpose: spice. You walk through a plantation near Guyave. The trees here are tall and orderly, their fruit ripening in clusters. The path is muddy, the sun relentless. Workers move between rows, collecting pods, slicing open the yellow skins and setting the mace out to dry. Many of these labourers are descendants of enslaved people. Though slavery was officially abolished in the British Empire in 1833, the systems of exploitation did not vanish overnight. Wages are low, hours are long, land ownership remains in the hands of a few. A man named Joseph, born free but raised in the shadow of bondage, tells you how the work continues. "My grandfather was not paid," he says. "I am, but the land still does not belong to me." He speaks without bitterness. But the weariness in his voice says more than his words do. Still there is pride. He picks up a mace-draped nutmeg seed and holds it to the light. "Beautiful thing though, eh?" he says. "Almost looks like fire." He smiles. Smells like it too. And yes, that's the strange duality of nutmeg. It's both a commodity and a memory, a burden and a comfort, a legacy that can be steeped in trauma and still taste like celebration. Because elsewhere, in Edinburgh and Boston and Paris, nutmeg is joy. In Scotland, bakers use it in shortbread. In New England, it's added to apple cider. In France, it's stirred into bechamel sauce. At Christmas, homes around the Western world fill with its scent, not from reverence or history, but from habit. The spice that once came with soldiers now arrives with sugar. But this transformation was never inevitable. It was made, shaped by centuries of planting, shipping, stealing, smuggling, regulating, reforming, and eventually forgetting. Forgetting the company, the monopolies, the massacres. Not entirely, no, but enough for nutmeg to shed its armour and settle into its new identity. Still, some stories refuse to vanish. Back in Banda, the Dutch are still present. The Vioch is long gone, but colonial governance continues. The forts remain, weather-worn and vine-covered. Some are used as storage sheds now, others sit abandoned. The nutmeg groves are patchier than before, some tended by local families, others lost to the forest. The frenzy has passed, but the trees endure. You walk along a stone path that once led to a company spice warehouse. Chickens peck at the moss. Children run by, laughing. They chase a ball made from old cloth and string. A fruit falls nearby and bursts open. One of the children grabs it and holds it up, shouting, "Look, gold!" The others giggle. They don't know how right they are, and how wrong. Because for centuries nutmeg was wealth. It was gold. It was worth cities, armies, lives. Now it's worth 80 pence at the London market. And maybe that's the truest symbol of imperial transformation. Not revolution, not justice, but quiet devaluation. The spice that launched ships now rattles on grocery shelves, sold in sachets next to cinnamon sticks. You sit on a bench in a New York park, 1845. A street vendor walks by with a tray of fresh donuts, hot, oily, rolled in sugar and dusted with nutmeg. A man buys two and tips his hat. He says, "Always reminds me of home." You wonder what home he means. Brooklyn? Belfast? Barbados? The flavour crosses continents now. It no longer belongs to Banda, or to Britain, or to anyone. It belongs to whoever uses it. And maybe that's the most radical change of all, because nutmeg was once an object of control, a symbol of imperial mastery, a prize to be hoarded. Now it passes from hand to hand, mostly unnoticed, except for the warmth it brings to a cup of cocoa, or the soft edge it gives to a winter stew. You return once more to Grenada before the day ends. The sky is soft pink. The scent of drying spice hangs in the air like smoke. A woman walks home with a basket on her head, full of nutmeg. Children wave, someone sings, and as the sun dips below the hills, a pod falls from a tree. It lands gently. No one scrambles to grab it. No one pulls out a musket. It will be picked in the morning, dried in the sun, ground to powder, and stirred into something warm. And that somehow is more powerful than empire. You find yourself waking slowly in a place that feels familiar, though you're not exactly sure where you are at first. The smell is unmistakable, a little sweet, a little sharp, warm, earthy and nutty all at once. Nutmeg. It's everywhere. In the air, in the floorboards, in the walls of this little shop you found yourself in. You're in Amsterdam. The year is 1850. The city is quieter than it was during the VOC's heyday. The canal still cut through its heart like glassy ribbons. The merchant houses still lean politely forward, but the golden age is gone, and in its place is a slower, steadier hum of commerce, not conquest. Inside this spice shop, a middle-aged grocer grinds fresh nutmeg at the counter. The metal grater sings against the seed. Tiny shavings fall into a small paper sachet, and the customer, a modestly dressed woman in a pale green cloak, tucks it into her basket with a little ceremony. "For the rice pudding," she says, almost to herself, and walks out the door. "You stay behind." The shopkeeper leans against the counter and wipes his hands on a rag. "That one always buys nutmeg," he says with a chuckle. "Never any pepper, just nutmeg." He gestures to a shelf lined with jars. Each is neatly labelled Grenada, Ceylon, Banda. He points to the Banda jar. "No one wants that anymore," he adds with a shrug. "Costs more, too spicy, customers say it's too strong." He pauses. "Funny, isn't it? Used to be worth killing for." And there it is. The whole story in one offhand remark, that a seed once worth cities is now passed over in favour of something cheaper, milder, easier to grind. Nutmeg has gone from sacred to background, from myth to pantry item. You step outside into the Amsterdam fog. It's the kind of cold that makes your breath visible and your nose sting. Somewhere a bakery is roasting something with sugar and clove, and just enough nutmeg to be noticeable, but not aggressive. The smell drifts through the mist, familiar and comfortable, and yet you can't stop thinking about Banda. Thousands of miles away, the islands are still there. The trees are still bearing fruit, but the world has changed around them. Banda is no longer the only source of nutmeg. It's no longer the obsession of naval powers or corporate boards. It's just Banda, and the Dutch, well, they're still there too. The VOC may be gone, but colonial rule remains. The East Indies are now administered directly by the Dutch government, but without the private corporate muscle of the VOC, the empire runs on paper, not passion. Officials file reports, traders process shipments, the fire is gone. You take a ship to Banda just to see it again. It's 1851 when you arrive. The harbour is still, the water dark green and dotted with fishing boats. A few company-built buildings still stand, though their white paint is peeling. Some are used as warehouses, others as homes. A couple have been abandoned entirely, left to bats and creeping vines. You walk the roads, stone paths that once echoed with the boots of soldiers. Now chickens wander across them. A woman balances a basket of yams on her head. Children run barefoot and laughing. The nutmeg groves remain. Some are well kept. Others are half swallowed by forest. But the trees still open their fruit the same way. Quietly, elegantly, that same delicate split like a smile. Inside, the gleam of mace, the solid brown seed. You meet a man named Yusuf, who tends one of the family-owned groves. His hands are rough, his back slightly bent. He tells you he's been harvesting nutmeg since he was a boy. "My father did this, and his father," he says, "but not for the Dutch, not anymore. We sell to anyone now, even the British." He smiles when he says it, not with bitterness, but with calm satisfaction. The empire, it seems, has let go of its grip. The tree finally belongs to the grower. Later, he grates a fresh seed into your tea. You sip it slowly. The flavour is unmistakable. It's sharper than what you tasted in Amsterdam, more pungent, a little wild. It fills your mouth in a way the other nutmeg didn't. You close your eyes, and for a moment you're not in 1851 at all. You're centuries earlier, in a Banda grove lit by torchlight, surrounded by kings and merchants and sailors who would give anything for this taste. But when you open your eyes, there is only Yusuf and the small wooden cup and the warmth spreading in your chest. In that moment you realise something. Nutmeg has always been two things at once, a flavour and a force, a comfort and a conquest, a gift and a weapon. And now, in this quiet century, the balance is shifting. The world is learning to live with nutmeg, not to fight over it. You sail next to Grenada. The island is thriving. Spices everywhere. Not just nutmeg, but cinnamon, clove, ginger. The plantations are still operating, though now many of the workers are freedmen and women. They farm their own plots. They sell at market. The power structure is still unequal, but it's changing, slowly. At the docks, a merchant tells you proudly that Grenadian nutmeg now outsells Banda's. He opens a crate, and the air bursts with scent. Rich, musky, familiar. Europe loves it, he says. So do the Americans. And it's true. By the 1850s, Grenada is exporting thousands of pounds of nutmeg each year. Recipes in American newspapers call for a dash of the island spice. Victorian cookbooks list it beside vinegar and flour. Apothecaries recommend it for indigestion, for hysteria, for melancholy. Nutmeg is everywhere, and almost no one knows where it came from, that it was once locked behind walls, that it was worth cities, that people died for it. Most just know the flavour, the smell, the comfort. You visit a parlour in Boston. It's a December evening, and a fire crackles in the hearth. A mother grates nutmeg into a warm milk drink for her children. They sip it slowly, blinking drowsily as snow drifts against the windows. She tells them it's a magical spice, and in a way she's right. Not for what it can do, but for what it has survived. Empires, monopolies, blood, time. And still the trees grow. The wind smells of cinnamon this time. You're no longer in Banda, nor are you in Grenada or Amsterdam. It's 1855, and you're standing in a bustling street in Calcutta, in the heart of British India. The sun is high, the air thick with the scents of cumin, turmeric and distant charcoal fires. But somewhere in the market haze, soft, sweet and unmistakable, there it is again, nutmeg. You follow it without thinking. A vendor is stirring a creamy rice pudding over a small coal stove. He grates a seed with practiced ease and the tiny curls fall into the pot like paper shavings. He doesn't look up when you approach, but he does speak. Good from the West Indies, he says. Not as strong as the eastern kind, but sweeter. You ask him if he's ever heard of Banda. He shakes his head. And there it is again, the vanishing act. The birthplace of nutmeg, the once mythic Spice Islands, are already fading from memory. Banda is still there, of course. The trees still flower, the seeds still drop. But the world has moved on, and the memory of what was once called the most valuable real estate on Earth is slipping into footnotes and forgotten maps. Meanwhile, nutmeg keeps travelling. Its reach has extended far beyond empire now. By the mid-19th century it has become global, not just in geography, but in identity. It belongs to no one, and yet it's everywhere. In the kitchens of New Orleans, nutmeg is stirred into stews and sprinkled over beignets. In Berlin, it's added to sausages. In Tokyo, in tiny amounts, it appears in fusion recipes passed through Dutch trade centuries ago. Nutmeg has become something quietly profound, a universal flavour. It no longer divides, it connects. But let's not pretend the story is only warmth and wonder. Colonialism doesn't disappear just because the spice trade calms. Power still shifts hands, now less with muskets and more with contracts. Grenada, Banda, Ceylon, all still grow nutmeg. But who profits? In Grenada, the land remains largely controlled by former colonial families. Though slavery has ended, and more black farmers now cultivate nutmeg on their own terms, the global trade is still skewed. Export prices are set in London. Shipping routes favour the empire. Most growers, even free ones, survive on modest margins. And Banda, still under Dutch rule, still quiet, still fragrant. You visit a school in Bandanera, where children read from Dutch language books. On the wall is a hand-drawn map of the world. Banda is a dot. The teacher, an islander herself, tells you that many of her students have never seen Jakarta, let alone Europe. But they know nutmeg, she says, smiling. They learn to identify it before they learn to read. It's true. In a grove just outside the village, you find two children gathering fallen fruit. They open the pods together, carefully separating the mace from the seed. One of them crushes the shell slightly, then holds it to his nose. He grins. It smells like my grandmother's cake, he says. And that's what nutmeg is now. Not riches, not rage, but memory. Back in Europe, the spice is having something of a cultural moment. In Victorian England, it's considered refined, elegant even. Recipes call for it in all the right places. Trifles, puddings, punches. But there's also a medicinal revival. Physicians claim nutmeg helps digestion, stimulates the brain, even calms nerves. It's sold in apothecaries under Latin names. Mothers carry grated nutmeg in lockets as a ward against fainting spells. You find an ad in a London newspaper. Wellness elixir. Contains true nutmeg from the West Indies. Aids in digestion and settles the mind. 3p a vial. It's no longer treated as sacred, but it is respected, and sometimes that's more enduring. Meanwhile, scientists begin to study it. By the 1860s, chemists isolate compounds like myristicin and safrole from nutmeg oil. They publish articles in medical journals theorizing about its psychoactive effects. One German scientist eats a spoonful of ground nutmeg and reports peculiar dreams and mild confusion. Another in Boston claims it cured his toothache. Historians still argue whether these were genuine breakthroughs or eccentric self-experiments, but the fact remains, even when turned into molecules and case studies, nutmeg continues to intrigue. The spice that once launched ships is now a subject of lab reports. You travel next to New York. The Civil War looms on the horizon, but for now the city is alive with growth. You walk past a bakery in Brooklyn, and in the window is a sign that reads, "Fresh apple pie, spiced with true nutmeg." Inside, the baker is a young Irish immigrant. He tells you his grandmother used nutmeg sparingly back in Galway. It was too dear. "Now I can get it by the pound," he says proudly. Still feels fancy. He pulls a steaming pie from the oven, and the scent is overwhelming. You close your eyes. For a moment you could be anywhere. Amsterdam, Banda, Grenada, Calcutta. The smell is the same. Familiar. Uniting. That's the secret power of nutmeg now. Not its rarity, but its reach. The spice has become a kind of global shorthand for comfort, for warmth, for home. And yet, in every home it enters, it tells a different story. In some, it's a symbol of survival. In others, a memory of holidays long past. In some, it's tradition. In others, a small rebellion, an old-world flavour in a new-world kitchen. Back in Banda, the sun sets on another day. The groves stand in silhouette. The sea a sheet of orange and violet beyond them. A family eats together on a woven mat outside their home. A stew bubbles in a clay pot. A grandmother leans over and grates nutmeg into the broth. She doesn't call it exotic. She doesn't call it expensive. She just calls it dinner. And maybe that's what freedom looks like. Not the grand declarations of empires, but the quiet reclaiming of what once was taken. The tree grows, the fruit falls, and the seed, now gentle, now free, makes its way into kitchens, not warships. From Banda to Brooklyn, from Guyav to Galway, the same warm spice touches lips and lives in ways no company could ever control. And as the world spins slowly into the modern age, nutmeg, like memory, remains. You wake now to the sound of rain, not a storm, just a steady, soothing patter on broad green leaves. You're in a modest wooden home perched on a hillside in Grenada. It's the 1870s, and the scent of nutmeg hangs as always in the air, but it's no longer an imperial perfume. It's homely now, intimate, worn into the wood of kitchen counters, into the fibres of cloth sacks stacked under beds, into the very soil beneath the house. A farmer stirs his morning porridge, adding a pinch of grated nutmeg without thinking, the way his mother and grandmother did before him. By now, Grenada is known not just to spice traders, but to travellers, journalists, and adventurers. It is the island of spice in every guidebook, postcard, and shipping ledger. In some ways, this fame is liberating, in others, it's suffocating. Because while the world has embraced the flavour, it has yet to fully see the people behind it. Walk with me to the St. George's Market near the waterfront. The cobbled lanes glisten with recent rain. Booths overflow with banana bunches, cacao pods, sugar cane, and rows of nutmeg jars, some powdered, some whole. A woman sells bundles wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. She calls out passers-by, offering samples, explaining the difference between fresh and dried mace. Her accent is strong, her knowledge sharper still. You ask her where the nutmeg came from. She smiles and points to the hills behind her. Right up there, my trees, my hands. There's pride here, not just in the product, but in the ownership. For the first time since nutmeg was globalized, it is becoming more than an export. It is a local heritage, a family business, a living archive. But even as some people gain autonomy, others are left behind. Large estates still dominate much of the production. Colonial-era plantations continue to export on industrial scales. The profits flow to London, to Liverpool, to Le Havre. Grenadian farmers may grow the nutmeg, but they don't set the prices. They don't own the ships, they don't write the contracts. And so a paradox unfolds. The nutmeg tree, once a symbol of global greed, now grows in fields that straddle freedom and inequality. Meanwhile, in the United States, the spice is enjoying its golden moment. The post-Civil War economy is booming. Railroads connect distant cities. Recipe books are published by the hundreds. And nutmeg finds its way into everything. Pies, meats, medicinal tonics, chewing gum, and even soap. Housewives are told that a dash of nutmeg enlivens any stew. Advertisements feature smiling children holding nutmeg-laced cookies, promising health and happiness. In New York, a company called McCormick begins bottling spices in glass containers with tightly sealed caps. One of their earliest hits? Pre-ground nutmeg. It's not as potent as fresh, but it's convenient, and America by now is in love with convenience. Back in Europe, the spice becomes a mark of middle-class taste. It is refined, familiar, and no longer expensive. German housewives add it to potato dumplings. Scandinavian bakers fold it into cardamom buns. French chefs include it in bechamel sauces. Even rural families in the Alps grate it into hot milk to ward off chills. The empires have changed, but nutmeg keeps flowing, seamlessly. And still, Banda watches. The Dutch East Indies remain under colonial rule. Banda, though quieter than in centuries past, is still producing. The island's groves have been largely turned over to smallholders or state-managed plots. The Dutch no longer guard it with the same fervour, but the weight of history lingers. You visit a Dutch colonial office built long ago by the VOC. It now houses 2 civil servants who process land records and spice permits. A clerk tells you that Banda nutmeg is still exceptionally fine, but too costly for most buyers. Grenada, he says, has outpaced us. He says it with a smile that's half admiring, half resigned. You leave the office and walk back into the groves. They're a little wild now, overgrown in places, but that only adds to their beauty. You pass a woman drying mace on woven mats. She waves you over and offers you a cup of sweet tea, spiced, of course, with nutmeg. You ask her what the spice means to her. She shrugs, thoughtful. It feeds us. It's not magic, just what we have. In that moment, you understand something deeper than any trade ledger could ever reveal. The true legacy of nutmeg isn't wealth, it's continuity. Through wars and monopolies, migrations and revolutions, the tree never stopped growing. The hands changed, the empires changed, but the tree stayed. Season after season it dropped its fruit, and people in every era found something sacred in its scent. Now let's pause in a boarding house in Liverpool. A Jamaican woman named Elsie works in the kitchen. She moved here in the 1860s, part of a growing West Indian community in the port cities of Britain. She cooks for dock workers and travellers, curried goat, breadfruit stew, fried plantains. Always she grates nutmeg into her rice and beans. Too bland without it, she says, laughing. She buys her nutmeg from a Caribbean grocer down the street, who imports it directly from family growers in Grenada. It's a full-circle moment. Caribbean spice, grown by Caribbean hands, cooked in a British kitchen, and no company claims ownership anymore. The spice has finally escaped its chains, not entirely perhaps, but enough to breathe, enough to become more than currency, enough to be culture. You return to the hills of Granada as dusk settles over the groves. The trees are quiet silhouettes now, their leaves whispering in the wind. A farmer finishes his work, wipes his hands on his trousers, and heads home. Behind him, a pod drops from a branch, bursting open on impact. The red of the mace glows faintly in the low light. No musket cracks, no governor watches, no ship waits in the bay. Only the tree and the land, and the people who, finally, are starting to write the next chapter of the spice that once belonged to the world, but now, just maybe, belongs to them. The morning greets you not with grandeur, but with a softness so complete it feels like a sigh. You're standing in the mist-shrouded highlands of Grenada in the year 1883, where the hills undulate in rolling green, and the air is soaked with the perfume of rain-soaked earth and fallen nutmeg. A light drizzle speckles the leaves. Each tree in the grove seems to hum quietly with the weight of seasons past. Birds sing from the canopy. their calls softened by fog, while somewhere in the distance a goat bleats lazily. This is not the grenadier of imperial conquest or desperate extraction. Not anymore. This is the grenadier of quiet routine, of hands in soil, of life carried forward one pod at a time. The nutmeg trees are in their prime now. They fruit reliably, generously. Each morning, locals wander the groves barefoot or in worn sandals, collecting the pale yellow pods that fall silently to the forest floor. The fruit splits naturally, always slightly off-centre as if exhaling. Inside lies that familiar treasure, the scarlet aril of mace wrapped around the dense brown seed of nutmeg. The scent is strong even before you touch it. Once crushed between your fingers, it becomes unforgettable. This morning you follow a farmer named Elijah as he moves along the rows. His shirt is damp with sweat and mist, and he carries a curved knife at his side to slice open stubborn pods. Elijah is a third-generation farmer. His grandfather was enslaved. His father worked under the apprenticeship system after abolition. But Elijah owns this land. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. He tells you that after slavery ended, many freed Grenadians pooled their money to purchase land. They bought it in fragments, an acre here, 2 acres there. Elijah's family managed to hold on to their share. The trees were here before us, he says, squatting to pick up a pod, and they'll be here long after. He leads you to a cooperatively run processing shed, a low wooden building with a rusting corrugated roof. Inside, women and men sit at long tables under open windows, sorting the seeds by size, removing imperfect mace, drying the pods on wooden racks. There's a rhythm here, a language of glances and nods. Someone sings a song in patois, and a few others join in quietly. On the wall is a chalkboard listing current prices per pound. London, New York, Port of Spain. These numbers shape lives. A good month means extra cloth, a school book, or roofing repairs. A bad month means boiled cassava for dinner again. But regardless of price, the work goes on, because nutmeg by now is more than spice. It is survival, identity, inheritance. This is the century where the empire loosens but doesn't yet disappear. Even as Grenadians reclaim land and build local economies, the overarching framework of global trade remains rooted in the structures of empire. Export licenses are issued through colonial offices, shipments are insured by British brokers, profit margins are decided in rooms far from the groves, and yet the people are no longer silent cogs. They are speaking, bargaining, resisting. Not in mass revolts, but in contracts, co-ops and community meetings. You sit with Gloria, a widow in her 40s, who leads one of the island's nutmeg cooperatives. Her father fought in a court case to secure his land title. Her mother taught her how to dry mace without it going mouldy in the rainy season. Gloria runs the operation with calm authority. She tracks sales, negotiates rates, even manages a credit pool for members. When you ask her what nutmeg means to her, she doesn't hesitate. It used to belong to kings and soldiers, she says. Now it belongs to us. And that shift, slow as it is, reshapes the legacy of a spice that once belonged to conquerors. Thousands of miles away in bustling cities and cold kitchens, that legacy is still consumed, but with no awareness of the story behind it. In London, nutmeg sits on store shelves, beside baking powder and tins of cocoa. Housewives dust it into rice puddings, spice cakes and clove-laced sauces. In Boston, grocers bundle it into holiday spice kits. In Paris, chefs shave it into bechamel sauce. The spice is praised for its warmth, its elegance, its festive aroma. But no one mentions the hands that grew it. That silence is the price of normalization. As nutmeg becomes more domestic, more ordinary, the brutal histories it carries are pushed into the background, and yet they live on, subtly, invisibly, in the very ways we use the spice. In Trinidad, a Creole woman named Bernadette grates nutmeg into sweet potato pone. She says her grandmother taught her that it softens bitterness. In Indonesia, nutmeg is ground into curry pastes and eaten with grilled fish. In Cairo, it's boiled into tea with clove and sugar, and in Berlin, sausages are seasoned with nutmeg and allspice. The flavours lingering on the tongue long after the meal ends. It is everywhere now, and yet still invisible. You travel next to Banda, where the trees still grow, but the market has all but moved on. The Dutch remain, but their focus has shifted. Coffee, oil and rubber now dominate colonial exports. Nutmeg is no longer the jewel of the empire, it is a footnote. The plantations in Banda have shrunk, some reclaimed by the jungle. Others are managed by locals under lease, their yields modest but steady. You meet a man named Jafar, who walks you through his father's grove. The paths are muddy, the fruit less abundant than in Grenada, but the scent is unmistakable. He tells you that most buyers now want Grenadian nutmeg. It ships faster, costs less. Banda nutmeg is seen as a luxury few are willing to pay for. But our trees are older, Jafar says. They've seen more. Indeed they have. You sit with Jafar under a tree planted perhaps 200 years ago. He speaks of how little the Dutch care now, how few ships come. But there's no sorrow in his voice, only a strange kind of freedom. We are no longer watched, he says. No one burns our groves, no one counts our seeds. And as the sun filters through the canopy, golden and dappled, it's clear that the story of nutmeg is no longer only about empires or economies. It's about endurance. The tree has always endured, through monopoly and massacre, through colonial ambition and forgotten villages, through luxury and obscurity. Now it endures through memory. A child in Grenada cracks open a pod and hands it to her mother. A cook in Cairo tastes his stew and adds another pinch. A baker in Brooklyn folds it into batter, remembering a scent from childhood. The spice that once demanded violence now simply asks to be remembered. And somehow, that's enough. The sun rises slowly over the hills of Guyave, casting soft golden light through the thin morning mist. Roosters crow in the distance. The trees, heavy with dew, sparkle under the emerging sunlight. You're standing once again beneath the nutmeg branches, and the scent here is as deep and familiar as a lullaby. It's 1895. The world beyond Grenada is racing forward. Telegraphs hum across continents, steamships stitch oceans together, and the first flickers of electric light are beginning to replace gas lamps in big cities. But here in the Grove, time hasn't changed its pace. Not really. Here, life still pulses with the rhythm of the falling fruit. You walk beside Thomas again, that same wiry, straw-hatted farmer whose voice sounds like it's been shaped by soil and smoke. His movements are slow but certain. He stops to squat at the base of a tree, picks up a fresh pod and cracks it open with his thumb. The scent is immediate, sweet, musky and sharp. He sniffs it and smiles. That one's a storyteller, he says, handing it to you. You roll the seed in your hand and ask him what he means. All nutmeg tells a story, he says, but some speak louder than others. This one's got an old tale. And so, as you walk with him, he tells you. His family has been here since the days when nutmeg was called Dutch gold. His grandmother, a midwife and healer, used to bury seeds in jars in her yard, not to plant, but to keep as protection. Against what, you ask? He smiles gently. Against forgetting. He tells you that in the years after slavery, many Grenadians began planting nutmeg not just for money, but for memory. My mother said the seed remembers things we don't, he says, like who we were before the masters came, and what we sang before the churches came. There's silence for a moment, only the wind rustling through the trees. Then he laughs. And of course, it pays the bills. That's the paradox of nutmeg in this era. It's both a sacred relic and a practical crop. It buys sugar, cloth, books for the children. It's sold by the pound and yet still grated over porridge with quiet reverence. It's packaged in brown paper and bartered at the market with the same seriousness as church tithes. As the century draws to a close, nutmeg has settled into a new identity. No longer the obsession of monarchs and merchants, but the everyday companion of cooks, healers, and farmers. It no longer shocks with rarity. It soothes with presence. Let's leave the Grove and head into town. In the heart of Guyave, a spice cooperative is bustling. The building is simple. Stucco walls, tin roof, the scent of wood smoke drifting from nearby kitchens. Inside, men and women sort through baskets of mace and seed, checking for mould, weighing bundles, scribbling figures in worn notebooks. There's laughter here, and the clatter of scale weights. And always, that perfume of nutmeg and sunlight. Gloria is here too, the same cooperative leader you met years ago. Her hair is streaked with grey now, but her posture is straight and her voice sharp. She walks the floor with a clipboard, inspecting the harvest. When you ask her how things have changed, she pauses, then says, We still send it overseas, yes, but now we send it on our terms. That's the shift. More Grenadians now control their own land, their own production, their own small slice of the spice trade. They write their own ledgers, sign their own shipping manifests. A few have even begun branding their nutmeg, stamping paper bags with family names or cooperative crests. And yet, the global market remains distant, faceless. In London, the spice arrives by steamship and is unpacked by warehouse workers who have never seen a nutmeg tree. Grocers decant the seeds into tins, paste labels, and stack them neatly between tins of cinnamon and clove. A Victorian lady buys a tin to season her Christmas pudding, not knowing the name of a single person who touched the seed before it reached her kitchen. In New York, an advertisement in a ladies' magazine reads, "The fragrance of the tropics, West Indian nutmeg, now in convenient tins." It sells not a story but a scent, and in Paris, chefs use it to perfume bechamel, calling it the quiet spice. Delicate, unobtrusive, civilized. You wonder what Thomas would think of that word, civilized. Would he laugh? Would he roll his eyes? Or would he simply split another pod and let its scent do the talking? Elsewhere in the world, the nutmeg tree is spreading. In Zanzibar, trees planted decades earlier are now bearing fruit. In Sri Lanka, small plantations begin to produce. Java continues its slow recovery after years of war and disease. The monopoly is long gone, and nutmeg now flows in all directions, an unbound spice, ungoverned by empire, shaped instead by climate and care. Back in Grenada, the schoolhouse you visited years ago now includes nutmeg in its formal curriculum. Children learn to identify the best drying conditions, to distinguish real mace from dyed imitations, to calculate profit margins. One boy tells you proudly, "When I grow up, I'll run my father's drying shed." His sister chimes in, "And I'll export to England." Neither of them speaks of empires. They speak of futures. You return once more to Banda. The islands are almost a dream now, lush, quiet, peripheral. The trees still grow and the pods still split, but the trade has largely passed them by. A few farmers sell to Indonesian middlemen. The Dutch administration, faded and bureaucratic, seems barely aware that the groves still fruit. You walk through Fort Belgica, now more ruin than rampart. Moss creeps over the stones. Birds nest in cannon mouths. Children play among the fallen walls, their laughter echoing where orders once barked. In the shade of a nutmeg tree nearby, you meet an old man named Reza. He tells you his grandfather saw the Dutch soldiers leave, and his father watched the merchants come and go. Now Reza just tends his trees. He sells what he can, keeps what he needs, and the rest he gives away. "Let the world have sugar and oil," he says. "I'll keep my spice." He offers you a piece of nutmeg cake wrapped in a palm leaf. It's simple, lightly sweet, fragrant, the kind of food that carries no flags, just flavour. As you sit beside him, cake in hand, it strikes you how far the story has come. From royal courts and armadas to schoolhouses and picnic groves, from the halls of monopoly to the tables of families. And through it all, the tree has never stopped. It bears witness and bears fruit. You take a bite, and it tastes like everything you've heard. You're waking to the soft lurch of a train. It's 19 Ostobus, and the world around you is shifting, just fast enough to notice, but not yet too fast to follow. The clatter of wheels on steel rails hums beneath your seat like a lullaby, and the countryside rushes past your window in a blur of hedgerows, red brick cottages and distant smokestacks. You're somewhere between York and Manchester, travelling through the heart of industrial England toward a spice market where, among sacks of wheat and barrels of barley, sits a familiar scent tucked in a modest tin. Nutmeg. Not long ago, nutmeg was rare, dangerous even. It launched ships, it raised villages, it bought cities and cost lives. But now it's nestled between pepper and baking powder on the grocer's shelf. It's affordable, dependable, the everyday spice for the everyday cook. You shift in your seat and notice a woman across the aisle. She's wrapped in a thick wool coat, leafing through a cooking magazine with illustrations of cherry tarts and savoury pies. The headline reads, "Seasonal recipes for the practical housewife." One article touts, "The secret of the modern sponge cake. A few spoonfuls of sugar, a dash of lemon zest, and a generous grating of nutmeg." You smile. The spice has changed costumes again. No longer the treasured prize of queens and generals, nor the guarded commodity of chartered companies. It has become helpful, domestic, almost invisible. And yet, if you listen closely, if you really pay attention, you can still hear it humming beneath the surface. A whisper of Banda, a trace of Guyave, a ghost of Dutch ships and stolen treaties. Let's follow the seed again, this time to New Orleans. It's summer, sticky and loud. Horse hooves click on cobbled streets and music spills from balconies in the French Quarter. Here, nutmeg is not exotic. It's essential. It perfumes beignets, simmers in Creole gumbo, and warms up sweet potato pies served on porches and in back alleys. A vendor named Delilah stirs a huge pot of spiced tea by the river. Her cart is shaded by a striped canopy. She says her grandmother used to make the same tea in Charleston, steeping cinnamon, clove, and a whole nutmeg in hot water with molasses. My mama said it helps you sleep, Delilah tells you, pouring a ladle into a tin mug. And remember, even if what you remember never really happened, there's something quietly profound in her words. Because that's what nutmeg has become now. Not just a flavour, not just a scent, but a memory vehicle, a link across generations. It's no longer just in the realm of trade, it's slipped into the soul of everyday life. And yet, beneath all that comfort, the structure of empire lingers. Still. You return to Granada that same year, stepping once again onto the Emerald Island where groves climb the hills like lazy vines. Here, nutmeg grows stronger than ever. Grenada is producing thousands of tons each year, most of it bound for Europe and North America. The spice is thriving. But not everyone is. Thomas meets you by the roadside with a handcart full of nutmeg sacks. He's older now, slightly hunched, a few more streaks of silver in his beard. Still cheerful, still sharp. He wipes his forehead and tells you the cooperative's latest prices, down this month, again. Not disastrous, but frustrating. Global markets are volatile. Shipping costs rise. Distant buyers demand lower rates. And here on the ground, the farmers carry the burden. We grow it, we sort it, we dry it, he says. But they still set the value. You ask him who they are. He shrugs. People with nice shoes who never saw a pod split. Still, he isn't bitter. He's proud. Proud of his land, his trees, his harvest. He walks you to the grove and shows you young saplings. His grandson planted them. They'll fruit in 6, maybe 7 years, he says, crouching to brush the soil with his fingers. When I'm gone, they'll still be here. That's the new inheritance now. Not gold, not land deeds, not empire, just trees, and the wisdom to tend them. In Java, halfway across the world, something similar is happening. The Dutch hold on to Indonesia has weakened slightly, and local farmers are reclaiming more agency. Outside Bandung, young growers plant nutmeg near the shade of coffee trees, rotating their crops with a precision passed down from ancestors and refined through colonial textbooks. A woman named Aini takes you through her family grove, barefoot on the volcanic soil. Her nutmeg isn't for Europe, it's for Jakarta, for local traders, for neighbours. She distills her own oil in a tiny copper still, sealing each bottle by hand. The label reads, Rempah Ibu, Mother's Spice. She sells it in the local market next to dried lemongrass, tamarind paste and handmade soaps. Her customers buy it for fever, sleep and the scent of home. My grandmother used to rub it on our feet when we were sick, she tells you. Now I do the same for my daughter. You ask her what nutmeg means to her. She pauses. It's not powerful, she says, but it's ours. The words settle into your bones. Because power, after all, isn't always about volume. Sometimes it's about presence, about patience. Nutmeg has always been patient. It's endured fire, empire, blight, and betrayal. And now, in the early 20th century, it's finding quiet ways to root itself into the future. Not through treaties or monopolies, but through muscle memory, through recipe and ritual, through scent. Back in England, a cook in a bustling Manchester pub grates nutmeg into a batch of mashed potatoes. He doesn't know where it came from, doesn't ask. It arrived in a tin marked West Indies Spice Co., and it smells right. That's enough. In Boston, a young girl helps her mother stir it into custard. In Cairo, an apothecary grinds it into a sleeping tincture. In Guyave, a teacher hands a student a fresh pod and says, "Smell that? That's our history." and somewhere in Banda a tree shakes in the breeze. A single pod drops, splits open, and reveals a shining red lattice of mace. No one is watching, and yet the story continues. The tree does not speak, but it remembers everything. You awaken this time not to the creak of a ship or the whisper of the grove, but to the low hum of conversation in a spice shop in Casablanca. It's 1908. The streets outside are a tapestry of wool cloaks, brass trays, and the muffled clatter of donkey carts against stone. Inside this narrow shop, stacked high with jars and canvas bags, the air is heavy with scent. Cardamom, saffron, dried rose petals, and of course, nutmeg. The merchant behind the counter is Moroccan, but his wares have travelled far. He scoops whole nutmegs from a carved wooden bowl and places them gently on the scale, as if each one carries a secret. He tells you they're from Grenada, stronger than the ones from India, he says, with a hint of showmanship. Richer oil. He rolls one between his palms and lifts it to his nose. This one, he whispers, was made for coffee. And you see that nutmeg, even here, continues its quiet reign. Not by force anymore, but by familiarity. No longer hoarded in royal courts or guarded by musketed men. It's just expected. It belongs. Part of daily life across continents. Sprinkled into spiced lamb, infused into black coffee, ground into sweet biscuits sold by street vendors in Cairo and Tunis. But the spice's journey doesn't stop there. In the kitchens of Istanbul, nutmeg finds its way into köfte. In Moscow, it appears in stews and vodka infusions. In Buenos Aires, bakers have begun adding it to dulce de leche custards. Even in Tokyo, where Western-style cafes are appearing along Ginza, nutmeg is shaved onto warm milk puddings and cinnamon toast. You're beginning to see it now, not just as a product, but as a kind of cultural ghost. It slips in and out of food traditions unnoticed but ever present. It binds the unfamiliar to the familiar, and it has done so for centuries. Let's return to Granada, where the spice's roots remain firm. The year is 1910, and you're walking with a man named Albert through a dense patch of forest outside Victoria. The trees are older here, and the path is muddy from a recent rain. Albert is quiet at first, but when he speaks his voice is warm and slow. He points out trees planted by his grandfather. He bought the land in 1865, he says, with the money from the first nutmeg harvest he did on his own. No overseer. He pauses to gather a few fallen pods. Every tree here tells time, he adds, not by years but by memory. You reach a clearing where a group of women are sun-drying mace on woven palm mats. The scarlet arils are laid out in neat rows, their colour vibrant against the dull brown of the mats. The women talk, sing and laugh as they work. One of them waves you over and hands you a dried piece to smell. It's like sunlight soaked into spice. Sweet, warm, a little peppery. She says her family's been doing this for generations. We don't need calendars, she laughs. We just follow the fruit. Even as the outside world modernizes, Granada continues to live in nutmeg time, but not without its challenges. The island's growers still face the whims of international markets. Prices rise and fall based on harvests they don't control, storms they can't predict, and buyers they'll never meet. The cooperatives have grown stronger, yes, and more farmers own their land. But the shipping companies, the exporters, the retailers, they're still mostly based in Europe. Harold, a tall, quiet man who runs a drying operation near St. David's, shows you a shipping invoice. We send hundreds of pounds, he says, tapping the numbers, but by the time it reaches England, they've sold it for 4 times what we see. You ask if anything's being done to change that. He shrugs. Maybe one day we'll sell it ourselves. But for now, Harold and his neighbours focus on what they can control. Quality, consistency, tradition. Each tree is pruned with care. Each seed is sorted by hand. The groves are passed down like heirlooms, and the knowledge flows through families like a quiet stream. And still, the spice travels. On the steamers headed to Liverpool, New York and Marseille, in trunks packed by emigrants and in jars sent as wedding gifts. It's now fully embedded in global kitchens. Housewives clip recipes for nutmeg pound cakes and rice custards. Pharmacists still recommend it for digestion and sleep. Even perfumers begin to experiment with nutmeg oil in colognes, praising its mysterious warmth. In one corner of Vienna, a young composer adds a dash of it to his tea before rehearsing. In Montreal, a boarding school cook stirs it into oatmeal, telling the girls it makes the morning nicer. In Durban, South Africa, a woman grates it into stew while telling her daughter stories of the spice boats from long ago. None of them mention Banda, or massacres, or monopolies. But the seed remembers, and somewhere deep in a library in Amsterdam, a historian is piecing together the ledgers of the VOC. She traces the shipments, the prices, the losses. She notes how a single island once controlled the world's supply, how that monopoly was shattered, how Grenada, half a world away, quietly stepped into the role Banda had been forced to abandon. She turns a brittle page and writes in the margin, "The seed always survives." You return to Banda one last time, now mostly forgotten by the global trade. The island is quiet, not in decline, but in peace. The old fort is covered in vines, the harbour welcomes only fishing boats now, and the trees, they still bloom, still fruit, still split their pods with quiet precision. A boy gathers the fallen seeds, placing them in a basket carved by his grandfather. He doesn't know the full history. He just knows his mother uses nutmeg to flavour stew, and his teacher uses it in ink for calligraphy, and his sister places it under her pillow to keep away bad dreams. And that's enough, because nutmeg no longer belongs to history. It belongs to life, to kitchens, to medicine cabinets, to rituals whispered from one generation to the next. The empires are gone, but the seed remains, and so does the scent. You awaken to ocean air again, but this time the soundscape is different, lower, slower. It's 1921, and you're aboard a coastal cargo steamer sailing past the edge of West Africa. Below deck, crates of cocoa, coffee and spice fill the hold. You stand at the rail as the sun rises over the horizon, casting a golden sheen across the water. Somewhere in the middle of those wooden crates, packed carefully in straw and cloth, are sacks of nutmeg, marked Grenada, West Indies. And somewhere in the world, someone is waiting for that scent. By now, the spice is nearly everywhere, in the cafes of Prague, the kitchens of Sao Paulo, the boarding schools of New Zealand. You could trace a map of the British Empire and beyond, just by following the scent of nutmeg through its recipes. It no longer belongs to a single island, nor even to the empire that once claimed it. It belongs to the world, but not equally. Back in Grenada, the 1920s have arrived with electricity, radio music and new ideas. Young people are talking about trade unions, land reform and independence. But in the groves, little has changed. The trees still bloom when they're ready. The pods still fall with a papery split. Farmers like Albert still walk the same paths their fathers did, bending to pick up the fruit, cracking it open with their thumbs, breathing in its scent with quiet reverence. You visit a drying shed near Guyiv. It's busier than you remember. Racks of mace flutter like crimson petals in the breeze. Workers sort, stack, pack. A teenage boy with bright eyes and calloused hands tells you that his father ships directly to a buyer in Canada now. No middleman, he says with pride, just a telegram and a boat. But not all stories are so bright. Prices are erratic. A disease in the Indonesian groves floods the market. A shipping strike delays exports. Rumours swirl about a new synthetic substitute for mace, and always the question looms, who really owns the trade? The answer remains what it has always been, complicated. Grenadian farmers may now own more land, and some have banded together in cooperative syndicates, but international pricing remains largely controlled by London brokers and Dutch exporters. A government bulletin from the Colonial Office still decides how much a pound of Grenadian nutmeg is worth. And even as labels say West Indies, the profits often flow in the other direction. Still, the people press forward. In a school in St George's, children learn about nutmeg not from British textbooks, but from their own teachers. One wall holds a mural, a hand holding a nutmeg pod, its rays drawn like a rising sun. Below, the words are painted in bold, our seed, our story. It's not propaganda, it's reclamation. Because by now, the spice is deeply woven into Grenadian identity, not as a relic of empire, but as a symbol of survival. You speak with an old woman named Miss Eloise, who sits on her veranda peeling breadfruit. She tells you her husband, now gone, used to wear nutmeg oil when he had a cold. He swore it opened the lungs, she says, laughing. Smelled like Christmas and medicine all at once. She keeps a few seeds in a glass jar on her shelf. For guests, she says. The special kind. You ask her where they're from, she smiles. Right from the tree out back. My grandmother planted it. She invites you to see it. You follow her into the yard where an ancient tree towers beside a clothesline. It's tall and gnarled, but still full of fruit. A fresh pod lies at the base, split open like a mouth mid-sentence, and the scent, still sharp, still sweet, still quietly defiant. Meanwhile, in New York, nutmeg is taking on new roles. The post-war years have brought jazz, speakeasies, and a boom in cocktails. Bartenders use it to finish drinks, shaving it fresh over eggnogs, punches, and milk flips. In upscale restaurants, it appears in white sauces and creamed spinach. In tenement kitchens, it's sprinkled into rice pudding. No longer a luxury, it's a memory trigger, a flavour of childhood, of celebration, of familiarity. In Harlem, a gospel singer named Ruth grates nutmeg into her tea before performances. It calms the nerves, she says, and reminds me of my mama. You walk through Chinatown, where a butcher wraps pork ribs in banana leaves with cloves and nutmeg. Makes the meat tender, he explains, tapping the spice jar. Passed down from Guangdong through Manila through Jamaica. And in a Jewish deli near Brooklyn Heights, you watch an old man carefully stir a pinch of nutmeg into chopped liver. My wife thinks I use too much, he says with a grin, but the rabbis never complained. It's a subtle thread running through all these places. Nutmeg as a signal of comfort, even when the people have no idea where it comes from. Most of them don't know Banda or Grenada, or anything about the trees or the drying racks or the farmers who walk before dawn. But they know how it tastes, and that somehow keeps the connection alive. Back in Grenada, the air feels heavier now, thicker with possibility. Talk of independence grows louder. A new generation wants more control, more respect, more access to the markets where their spice ends up. They've begun keeping records, building warehouses, lobbying governments. It's not revolution. Not yet. But it's a long-awaited stirring. You sit one evening with Thomas's grandson, young, serious, and full of questions. He's studying agricultural science, wants to breed stronger nutmeg trees, wants to cut out the exporters entirely, wants to see Grenadian nutmeg branded with names, not regions. We grow the world's spice, he says. Shouldn't the world know our names? You nod. He asks if you want to see the newest seedlings. You follow him to a grove of waist-high trees planted just last year. They're bright, green, hopeful. He crouches beside one, touches its leaves gently. My daughter will harvest this tree, he says. I'll be old by then. And in that moment, you realise, this is what survival looks like now. Not just in seeds or sacks or exports, but in planning, in planting, in the belief that the future will come and that it can be shaped. The empire is no longer watching, but the trees still grow, and the scent still carried by wind and memory remains just as powerful as ever. You wake to the smell of wood smoke and earth in a quiet Grenadian village tucked between the hills and the sea. It's 1932. Roosters crow nearby, and the morning haze clings low over the groves. Beyond the garden fence, the trees stand still and heavy, their branches gently bowed with the weight of fruit. Green gold pods that wait for no one. Nutmeg in this part of the world doesn't need to be summoned. It arrives on its own time. And its time has come again. The air feels warm even this early, humid with the promise of rain. Children walk barefoot down the path towards school, their slates tucked under their arms, their lunches packed in cloth bundles. A girl stops beside a tree, stoops, and lifts a split pod from the dirt. She doesn't keep it, just cracks it open, breathes in the scent and smiles. Then she sets it gently back down and continues on her way. Even children here know the rhythm of nutmeg. It's not taught in books. It's learned in the body by the hands that sort seeds, the noses that test ripeness, the memories that pass from grandmother to grandchild. This, more than any document or decree, is how the legacy of spice survives, and that legacy matters more than ever now. The world beyond these groves is reeling. The Great Depression has swept through the global economy like a wildfire. Prices have collapsed, demand has dried up, ships are fewer, slower, and less reliable. In London and New York, shopkeepers have reduced their spice orders. In Marseille and Amsterdam, traders delay payment or cancel shipments entirely. But the trees in Grenada still fruit, the pods still fall, and the people still gather. You walk through the village with Clara, who runs a small spice cooperative with her cousins and neighbours. Her family has lived on this land for 3 generations. When the market falls, she says, brushing back her hair with a cloth, The trees don't stop, so neither do we. Her yard is a flurry of quiet labour. Children sorting mace, elders cracking pods, women laying the arils out to dry on mesh trays. Each task is done with care, but not urgency. They know this pace. They trust it. Clara invites you into her kitchen, a cool room with soot-darkened walls and a wood-fired stove. She's making cornmeal porridge, stirring with one hand while grating nutmeg with the other. The scent fills the air instantly. She uses a large, worn grater, a wedding gift from her mother's mother. For flavour, you ask? She smiles. For remembering. She ladles out a bowl and sets it in front of you. Eat, she says. It will keep you. As you do, she tells you about the cooperative's new idea, keeping some nutmeg back from export, selling it in smaller quantities to Trinidad, Barbados, even Guyana. We used to send everything to London, she says, but the boats don't always come, and when they do, the price is bad. By selling closer to home, she explains, they can earn just enough to survive. Not thrive, but survive. It's not about growing rich, she says. It's about staying standing. You nod and understand, because that is what nutmeg means here now. Not luxury, not power, but resilience. It is the thing that gets you through the week, that brings in just enough money to buy cloth, to fix the roof, to send one child to school instead of none. Later, you walk with Clara's uncle Joseph through a small plot of land where he's planting new seedlings. He shows you how he spaces them out just enough to breathe, how he checks the bark for health, how he's testing different drying times to get a deeper oil. My father worked for a Dutch company, he says. He never owned a tree. He pauses. I do. He says it plainly, not boastfully, just firmly, as if claiming something long overdue. Elsewhere on the island, similar stories unfold. In the hills of St. Mark, a young woman named Ruth runs a spice stall near the church square. She sells grated nutmeg, ground mace, nutmeg oil and balm, all homemade. She wraps each product in brown paper tied with string. I don't send mine away, she tells you. I keep it here, sell it here. We like flavour too, you know. You ask where she learned her recipes. She grins. From my grandmother, who learned from her neighbour, who learned from a woman who worked in the governor's kitchen. You laugh. That's quite a chain, she nods. That's how we survive, woman to woman, hand to hand. In a way, nutmeg is now less about spice and more about story. It threads its way through family lines, through Sunday meals and healing baths, through whispered remedies and remembered songs. It carries the shape of empire, but not its weight anymore. Back in Europe, the spice has faded to the background. Most shops carry it still, but in smaller quantities. Households ration, recipes adapt, and people make do. In an English boarding house, a cook uses just a sliver in a rice pudding for the children. In a Viennese cafe, the chef replaces nutmeg with pepper to stretch his stock. Just until better times, he says. But in Grenada, the spice keeps falling, keeps speaking, keeps surviving. You return once more to Banda, where nutmeg trees have retaken abandoned groves. The Dutch presence is sparse now. A few administrators, a few boats. Local families work the land again, quietly, cautiously. A young boy named Danny shows you a grove where his grandfather planted 3 new trees. He says we can sell again soon, Danny whispers. Not much, but enough. You ask him what he'll do with the money. Buy a book, he says shyly, and maybe shoes. You smile, because that is what nutmeg buys now, not palaces or fleets or silk-lined ledgers, but books, shoes, a little more comfort, a little more hope. As the sun sets over the groves, you sit beside an old tree. Its bark is scarred. Its branches stretch far. A fresh pod falls beside you. You pick it up, split it open, and hold it close. It smells the same as it did in 1621, in 1721, in 1821, and it will still smell that way tomorrow, because empires may fall and markets may break, but some things, quiet things, rooted things, endure. The year's 1940. You wake to the low rumble of distant thunder and the rhythmic rustle of palm fronds swaying in the wind. Outside, the Caribbean is bracing itself, not for rain, but for war. The Second World War has arrived on island time, not with bombers or trenches, but with scarcity and silence. Ships don't come as often anymore. Mail is delayed, export routes shift or vanish altogether. But the trees, as always, do not care. You rise early and walk through the grove with a woman named Esther. She's in her 50s now, her hair streaked with silver, her hands stained from years of drying mace. She carries a basket on her hip and walks slowly, not because she's tired, but because she's listening to the trees, to the soil, to something older than radio news. War out there, she says, nodding toward the sea. But here, still peace. She reaches down, picks up a fallen nutmeg pod and splits it. Still working, she adds with a soft laugh. The tree doesn't know who's fighting. But Grenada does. The war has changed everything. Shipping lanes are patrolled or blockaded, insurance rates have skyrocketed, and the nutmeg trade, once quietly dependable, is now unpredictable again. Some months prices rise sharply due to shortage. Others they fall just as quickly. Farmers can't plan, exporters stall. Still, the spice must be harvested, sorted, dried, stored. Esther invites you into her shed, a low tin-roofed structure where rows of drying racks hold this week's harvest. The scent is rich, comforting, steady. She shows you a tin marked 1940, hold for safer ship. Many farmers are doing the same now, stockpiling, waiting for a lull in the chaos. Nutmeg doesn't rot quickly, and its patience matches theirs. But they can't wait forever. Cooperatives gather more frequently now, not just to discuss yields, but to pool resources, to share intel, to protect what they've built. Younger members propose radical ideas, processing nutmeg into finished goods on the island, forming direct links with buyers in neutral nations. Let London wait, one man says. Let us try Lisbon. And yet, even now, the global structure persists. Colonial administrators still oversee export licenses. Customs inspections remain harsh. Bureaucracy moves slower than sailboats, and the benefits still skew upward. But the tone is changing, less reverent, more practical. There is no illusion anymore, no belief that empire will save them. In a meeting under a breadfruit tree, Esther speaks. We've always been good at growing, she says. It's time we get good at owning. That line echoes across the island. It appears in chalk on schoolhouse walls, on the backs of seed sacks. It even finds its way into song. Back in Europe, rationing intensifies. The British government publishes a list of luxury imports to reduce or eliminate. Nutmeg is there. People are encouraged to substitute with pepper, with bay leaf, with blended spice powder. But old habits die hard. One housewife writes to her grocer, "Please save 1 tin. My pudding tastes wrong without it." In a hospital in Leeds, a nurse adds a shaving of nutmeg to warm milk for a wounded soldier. For sleep, she says. For home. Even as bombs fall on cities, the memory of flavour remains intact, even when everything else breaks. In Grenada, war years bring hardship, but also clarity. The people begin talking not just of trade, but of independence, of ownership, of agency. The younger generation no longer wants to send away their best crop only to buy it back in tins. They want to process, label, brand. They want Grenadian nutmeg to mean something more than origin. You meet a man named Elias who's building a workshop from discarded shipping crates. He plans to produce nutmeg balm, oil and soap under one roof. He shows you a hand-drawn label, Isle Root Remedies. He grins. No middleman, just us. You ask how he'll ship it. He shrugs. Somebody will come. They always come. And somehow he's right. Even as the world tilts, it still turns, and spice still moves, from Banda, where a few aging trees continue to fruit in the shadow of their history, from Java, where local producers finally outnumber colonial ones, from Zanzibar, from Kerala, from Trinidad, but most of all, from Grenada, now nicknamed the Isle of Spice by the traders who still dock, war or no war. As 1945 approaches, the war slows. Ships begin to return, letters arrive again, the groves breathe a little easier, and the people? They're different now. Tired, yes, but surer of themselves. You walk one last time through the grove with Esther. The trees are flowering again. Do you think things will change now, you ask? She looks up at the branches and smiles. They already have, because the groves that once whispered of survival now speak of something bolder, of ownership, of identity, of future. And as the sun sets low, casting golden shadows across the drying racks, you realise the story is no longer about nutmeg's past. It's about where it's headed. It's about who carries it forward, and how something so small, so fragrant, so often overlooked, could bear the weight of an entire island's dream. And now, as you settle deeper beneath your covers, let the story quiet itself. Let the groves fade gently from view, the sun slipping behind the hills of Grenada, the last pod falling softly into the grass. No more ships, no more markets, no more rush, just the tree, still standing, still fragrant, still whispering through the leaves. Imagine the scent of nutmeg in the air around you, a trace of sweetness, a wisp of spice. Let it warm the space behind your eyelids. Let it soften the edges of the day. Let it cradle you, gently, in the rhythm of something ancient and kind. The people you met along the way, Esther, Thomas, Rahmat, Delilah, are finishing their work now, laying down baskets, closing shutters, banking coals. The world beyond their groves still turns, still clamours, but here, under the leaves, things are simple, steady, safe. And you? You're just another traveller passing through the long, gentle journey of a seed. So breathe in, long and slow. Exhale. Let your mind wander, soft as drying mace in the midday sun. You're safe now. The story can wait. The spice can wait. And in this moment, this quiet, generous moment, so can you. End of story. Sweet dreams.